I presume we might as well start our session. The first speaker is Dr. Majumdar. The first speaker is Dr.
Sir, before that, let me introduce you to them. This session is going to be chaired by Dr. Debashish Sengupta, Associate Professor and Head of the Department, English Department, UG and PG Studies of Rishi Bankim Chandra College. Welcome, sir. Please start.
Okay. Thank you, Chandra. I welcome all the participants and speakers in this session. And since we are always, since time is short, I propose that we should start our session immediately. The first speaker is Dr. Majumdar. She is Assistant Professor of English, Bhanor Mahavidyalaya, which is affiliated to Calcutta University. And the topic is Writing to Othello, How Dark is the Mood? Should I ask, should Dr. I would like to invite Dr. Majumdar to present the paper, please. Dr. Majumdar, can you hear me?
Yes. Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible. You're absolutely audible.
A very good evening to all of you. How much time do I have for the presentation?
You have around 8 to 10 minutes, please.
Okay. Now, a very good evening to all of you. My paper has been titled, How Dark is Othello? One of the reasons why I chose this title for Othello was that, perhaps this was my post-graduation years when reading the Ardent edition of Othello, I was struck by one paragraph in the introduction which said the editor had sort of mentioned that, he found a Negro bus conductor handsome enough to qualify for the role of an Othello. That is where perhaps, my journey began in understanding, this orientation about Othello. If I am to place Othello in a sort of a historical space, it was a kind of a rule in Venice of the time when Othello was, historically placed in that way, to have somebody not from the ruling aristocrat family as one of the generals. So he naturally had to be somebody who was not a Venetian. Therefore, this otherness is perhaps not to be located as much in his racial orientation as much as in this particular possibility. But there has been, because of the usage of words like Moor and other things, to take him as somebody who is dark and somebody who is black, essentially. In 1987, Jude Sussman was adapting Othello in South Africa. And the most important part was that she was using a black actor, Kani, for this particular role of Othello. Now, this was, a challenge in itself on a number of, levels in that way. If you're talking about, Shakespeare in Africa, it is, of course, with the process of colonization, that in that way, Shakespeare and performances arrived. Othello, at that particular point, this is just, the apartheid time in South Africa. It continued to be referred, it is a kind of a political space in which the play was being played. Reading, some of Kani's experiences, I was struck by that fact that he said that I knew that this was dangerous, this could be a challenge. And, I could also understand the discomfort of the white audience in seeing a black man perform on the stage. Earlier, if you would see the European adaptations of Othello on stage, it would be a white man who would be painted dark, or black, and this is how the presentation or the performance would go on. Kani would say that, when I would come and practice for my sessions, I would usually, come in a particular t-shirt, and beneath I would wear a t-shirt where I would write that I don't give a damn. As if, this was a kind of a protest that he was trying to establish even through his performance. Judith got a call even from the African National Congress leaders, who sort of wanted to find out that what could Othello have with, any kind of African national sentiments. They were not very sure how that could even be addressed. And then, among the many reviews that were there were, white men who would be watching this particular play, clearly uncomfortable that Kani was the black man, playing Othello on stage. So, through this performative establishment, or even the performative language that was being used, in this particular play, you could see that this was, a reflection of subverting racial notions that were definitely part of this vocabulary when you were trying to read plays like Othello. The anti-African, the anti-Negro feelings that would be there. And South African academicians have repeatedly pointed out that this institution of, of racializing and using color as a sense of othering is something which has been there in the vocabulary of presentation, especially when it comes to this kind of Shakespearean adaptations. Othello the play, perhaps remains the most unsettled appetite ideology on the Johannesburg stage. It sort of interrogated the acclaimed, appetite sensibility and appetite movement. So Shakespeare represents racism, the problem and reality to all of us. Shakespeare challenges us and we take sides. Even today, Othello still makes people uncomfortable. Iago, is perhaps the greatest racist in the entire play, and if it is to be taken as one of the greatest tragedies of Shakespeare, what also problematizes that, Iago has more stage space than Othello. Second, many feminist readings have, bordered and, debated on the line of Othello when he says that I loved too well, but not wisely. Almost taking the words away from him and saying that these words should have been Desdemona's. I am not problematized by the fact that, this should be the words of a woman. But of course, what problematizes the whole thing, that perhaps there is a kind of a itching discomfort that this could be a tale about a black man and a white woman. So that perhaps also needs to be addressed, the struggle, which is there. Janet, when talking about this presentation, had spoken how apprehensive she had been about it. She felt that the relationship between Othello, black, and Desdemona, white, would be very problematic, if not dangerous, to do in South Africa at that time. And this is 1987, not too late, as I would say, but not too much into the past, as one would say. The other, play, or I would say that I was wanting to sort of bring to notice, was also the Polish playwright Krzysztof Warlowski's African Tales by Shakespeare. So this, interestingly, is a kind of a monologue, and you have one actor playing the role of Othello, King Lear, and Shylock. Now, what this particular play addresses, the fact is that till date, a black man, an old man, and somebody who is a non-white in that way, a non-Christian in that way, and a non-white remains a problem to the vocabulary of people. You have problem with this kind of acceptance. So there is a prejudice, especially a color prejudice, when it is brought about in talking about Othello. I would rather appreciate that, if Othello began to be looked as a play of a complex, of, the love complex, the way perhaps, we would look at a tale like Romeo and Juliet, or I would rather want to look at Othello as somebody who comes into the critical debate because, he is trying to perhaps, settle down in a foreign country. He is somebody who is an outsider, and he has to, sort of make himself acceptable in a space where he is not born and brought up, or where, of course, the stigma of an outsider remains with him without associating the color with him. So until unless this kind of, reading, or the, this institute, of perceiving the character of Othello happens, we will perhaps, continue to read him as a black man who is unable to adjust and fit himself into the white world. This assimilation, the lack of assimilation, the inability to integrate is what I believe is also a kind of a colonized hangover. Of course, Africa would, learn Shakespeare, would see adaptations of Shakespeare, of course, after the process of colonization had begun there. That is there definitely. But, the fact that, it would have to be read, the characters, when presented in these kind of sensibilities, have to be read from a sense of disassimilation, is what I would like to point out in a seminar or a webinar like this, where we are talking about, integration and acceptance. Thank you. I finished my paper.
Sir?
Oh yes, I'm sorry. I would thank Professor Majumdar for her wonderful paper on Othello, the racial problem, and the problem of assimilating the black man in the context of the whites. And I now throw this paper open for discussion and comments and observations, please. Hello, am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are absolutely audible.
Yes. Are there any comments and observations on this paper? Dr. Majumdar, I have a question, please, for you.
Yes. Yeah.
You have referred to Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights and to the character of Heathcliff as well in your abstract. How do you really relate Wuthering Heights to Othello and
I would like to see, yes. Throughout the text, especially throughout the text of Othello, you would see that he is always referred to as the Moor, the name almost not being mentioned. Whereas in case of Heathcliff also, if I look at the narrative of Nelladine, if I'm even talking about Lockwood, they are also very uncomfortable with referring to Heathcliff, with his proper name. They would rather call him a Lascar, they would rather call him, a gypsy. These are the terms that would be associated with him, as if, it is the connotative, perhaps the skin color, perhaps his, inability to physically or, the features not being able to integrate himself into a complete white society itself makes him brutish and the other. If you're talking about rebellion, Catherine is an equal rebel, but, Heathcliff, is even not a Christian name. So that also is what I'm trying to point out. Both of them, seem to be stigmatized. The interpretation and the immediate understanding of the characters around them is basically based on what they look like. Using this kind of, what we would say kind of a body shamming in that way to understand the physical, psychological nuances of these characters. So that what I believe is problem. That would not have happened if there is a kind of a mainstream white male European actor in that way. So, there is a lot more sympathy for even Hamlet, who sort of, makes a lot of mistakes, ends up killing a lot of people, making, jeopardizing a lot of things, even staking, as I would say, the future of his own country. That is something that Othello does not do. He's always concerned about, the safety of the country that he is the general of. So that is where, we seem not to be empathizing this kind of qualities, of Othello.
Okay. Any other questions, any other observations on Dr. Majumdar's paper, please? Any comments, any questions, please, on Dr. Majumdar's paper? Then should we move on to the next paper, Dr. Mallika A. Nair.
Yes, sir.
Mallika A. Nair. And,
Dr. Am I audible?
Yes, you are perfectly audible.
Okay.
Dr. Nair is Assistant Professor and Research Guide, Department of English, Vimla College at Thrissur, Kerala. Her topic is the body as nation, erasure of women in African literature.
Thank you, sir.
I invite Dr. Nair to make a presentation, please.
All right. Thank you, sir, for your kind words. My topic for the day is the body as nation, erasure of women in African literature. Now, it's nothing complicated. When we go through visual narratives and textual narratives of African literature, you always find stereotypical characters being portrayed as the mammy figure, as the conjurer, and as, the sexual prowess women there without any outlet for her frustration. So these are certain stereotypical ways in which African women are characterized. Their identity, their roots, everything is forgotten. So that is why the use of the word erasure. It is, the identity is slowly being wiped off the map of narratology. So now, why does it happen? This is where the topic, the body or as nation, is quoted. Now, I kind of like to place the body, the physique of the African woman, and that then later epitomizes nationhood, the black African dark mysterious continent. The history of African women envelops an array of tribes and communities, and one who wants to study the women characters through these narratives cannot simply forget about the root, the place from where she emerges. The myriad nuances of cultural spectrum that we find across these narratives are also finely interwoven with the very fabric of their social existence. So you cannot remove a woman from her surroundings and then speak of her as only being characters in these books or movies. Now, they are predominantly agriculturists, and the land and labor is controlled by the kin groups and clans. So the first Europeans who entered the continent in the 15th century, it's very, very interesting to note that these females, these black African female characters, women, they actually had a very serious role to play in the society's socio-economic and political structure there. They were astounded, the first Europeans were astounded to observe that female market traders operated as arbitrators between the European missionaries and the natives. So they had a very empowering position in their own, native clime. Now, what happened when the missionaries entered? These women were used, misused, and abused, so much so that they had to face the tyranny of dual subjugation, one within their own clan, and secondly from the white Europeans who entered the country. Now, I have here taken three stereotypical characters, the dark and powerful African woman who epitomizes her mysterious continent where humans first took their baby steps to life within a community. The mighty and magnanimous way in which the women handled their duties in Africa actually became the caricature forms for all characters throughout visual narratives, like movies that spoke of the mammy figure. Okay, let me just bring into our discussion a few sentences spoken by Frances Bailey. I quote, "Her physical image has been maliciously maligned. She has been sexually molested and abused by the white colonizer. She has suffered the worst kind of economic exploitations. She's been forced to serve as the white woman's maid and wet nurse for white offspring, while her own children were often then not starving and neglected." She couldn't take care of her own children, but then she had given almost everything that she had for the family where she had to work. Now, the most common among these stereotypes would be the mammy figure who is forever benevolent and caring. I think I have a few slides there which would make things very easy. Is the slide clear? Could anybody respond? Is the slide visible?
No.
Is the slide visible to you, sir?
No.
Are these slides visible? Hello?
The slides visible for me, it isn't. Could anybody else please tell us whether the slides are visible or not?
It is not.
Okay, then I shall continue with my narrative. That's fine. All right.
Ma'am, you can try again by presenting the screen. If it does not work, then you can proceed as you.
Let's see. Okay. Now is it visible?
No, ma'am.
No.
It's not visible.
Okay, then there are some connectivity issues here. I shall continue with my narrative here. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely audible.
Okay, thank you so much. So again, the mammy figure there. Let me just call into your memories, movies of the mammy figures appearing in Hollywood movies. One would be Gone with the Wind. Another would be The Help. Then again, The Sound and Fury, William Faulkner's book, which was recreated into a movie. And then you see the mammy who nurtures the family's young children. I mean, she is this benevolent and caring mother, almost a mother. She endures the rashness of her white family, European family, while being the center of the family's smooth functioning. Now, these characters are stereotyped. I mean, is it the only role that an African woman can ever play? Or is she always this caring and benevolent woman who does not have anything else left in her to fight for her own identity? Well, it is questionable. The mammy was always black or stout and obese, very religious, ever kind, beyond all doubts, quite capable and strong, who gives all but asks for nothing in return. Now, this is something that is, a dominant racist structuring of the whole process of subjugation. They are always stereotyped as very quiet, asking for nothing, not even their liberal rights. But then, often they give everything, their life, their families, many generations of these families to these families of white Europeans who have employed them as slaves. So now we move on to the help again, where the mammy is the epitome of powerful yet kind mother figure, and more often than not, these hefty mother figures are diagonally put against the subtle, beautiful, white, delicate heroines of the European concept. Scarlett O'Hara's character, Vivian Leigh, who plays the character in the movie Gone with the Wind, itself is one of the most exemplifying factors of the stereotypical character played by the Black African mother or woman. Now, yet another, the second stereotypical character that comes up is the wicked conjurer. You see her with hefty necklaces and big, mystic earrings, and she is almost like a shaman who speaks to the other world, the nether world, the world of the dead. And she is often feared, okay, and she is often considered a repugnant figure. She is a fearsome woman who is supposed to have the powers over the dark mysteries of the universe. Now, this imagery is often associated with the African shamans who were actually doctors, they were witch doctors and healers with a sound knowledge of all their traditional voodoo charms and black magic. They were actually physicians, and they were later portrayed as these mystic characters who were dangerous to look upon and to be interacted with. Now, there is an undeniable sense of fear and foreboding attached to this image whose wrath can wreak havoc upon whoever stands against her will. There again, so that was the second stereotypical character. The first one was the mammy. The second was the image of the black woman as voodoo, charmer, the conjurer, and then we move on to the third, stereotypical character, where she plays the role of a concubine whose insatiable sexual hunger and prowess makes her unjustifiably bracketed. I mean, to think of, Laura Mulvey's essay on visual pleasures, visual narratives and, pleasures, she speaks about two terms there, voyeurism and fatalism. Now, this is what typically happens in any Hollywood movies, okay? You stereotype a character, here particularly a black woman, and then you think of that as being the whole nation. You have this notion that these black women portrayed through the Hollywood visual narratives become the nation. So Africa is actually identified through these characters, which is very, gross. I mean, that is not what Africa actually means. They have their own very rich tradition and culture, but then we tend to overlook that because Hollywood gives us a perspective through which we need to decipher, analyze, and understand the culture of Africa. Now, again, this black woman here, she is, according to Laura Mulvey, I have taken the theoretician because she speaks about visual pleasure and narrative cinema. Again, she uses two terms, one is voyeurism. Voyeurism is when you do not understand a particular character in a woman. Okay, when she speaks about liberation of sexual senses, she becomes the bad, the immoral woman. She is the voyeur there. She woos men into her clutches. And then again, there is the diagonally opposite term of making the woman the Madonna, the fatalism. Fatalism is treating the woman as goddess. Well, life is neither black or white. It is the reality of gray that lies in between that makes it all. Now, we very comfortably forget it because it is the Hollywood movies and visual narratives that has brought us these identifications of African women. So that is the third stereotypical way in which the world discovers or deciphers Africa through these women. We move on to the fourth stereotypical character. They are the mulattas. The mulattas, actually they were, sadly to speak, they were very badly abused black women who were silenced through the ages. They were actually banished to the margins of their own community. Okay, they were abused and sold, and in a sense, their lives were wasted away. Now, again, I quote another theoretician, Barbara Christian, who says, I quote, her very being, the mulatta, her very being called up the illicit crossing between cultures. We are speaking about, what is the result of a European master, moving in with a black slave. And what happens is the mulatta. So there is this illicit crossing between cultures. She is American in that she emerges out of the sexual relationship between a black slave mother and a white slave master. A sexual relationship denying the most basic philosophical concept of slavery, that the blacks were not to be considered human beings. Now, how outrageous can that be? So this is another stereotypical way in which, narratives, both textual as well as visual narratives, have tried to underscore even the identity of being black, especially black African women. They are doubly subjugated, to use the term by Kate Millett. They are doubly subjugated. Being a woman is itself a subjugation, and being an black African woman is again a double subjugation there. So there again, these are instances where, a cross-section of African society is unfortunately portrayed to the whole world as the real, within quotations. I would like to put that real inside quotations. Actually, they are not. They're very powerful women, and you have instances of such characters, the women coming up through the contemporary society's, educative ensembles. Okay, they are well educated. There are doctors, there are lawyers, teachers, professors par excellence, even in amongst the black American women, and of course media personals. And we tend even now to direct the character analysis found through Hollywood movies to the identity of nationhood. So there the body becomes nation, and the nation no longer has its own identity. It is only identified through these stereotypes that we tend to, again go back to with reference to African literature. Thank you there. That's all.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nair. It has been a wonderful paper. The body as nation, erasure of women in African literature. You have really, explained things with reference to many films that we like and we have seen over the years, that is Gone with the Wind.
I wish I could show you those slides where I had, these quotations those used by those characters, and how those characters are identified as coming from this dark continent, Africa. So high time we overlooked the characters and really understood what the nation was all about. Thank you, sir.
Yes. I would now like to invite questions and comments on this paper by Dr. Nair. Would anyone please have any questions or any observations to make? Dr. Nair, I have one question.
Yeah.
So I have also one question,
yes,
if you
please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Dr. Mallika, you were talking about mammy figure, okay,
Yes.
very subjugated women.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you find any difference in the portrayal of Indian women and African women? Because I find the same similarity there. If we forget about the prototypes, then the same mammy figure, African women, and the same sort of portrayal of Indian women, women as mother, the same sort of. So what difference or do you find in the similarity?
Well, I wouldn't say that, there is a lot of similarity between the two ways in which representations are brought about. One, because we have the opportunity of opening up to the world, which is mostly denied to African women even today. When Indians can no longer be very comfortably stereotyped as the mothers only, because even in America, half the country has very well educated, Indian brains there who can speak for themselves. But how many African women, not Afro-American, I'm speaking literally of African women who have the opportunities to move up and say that that is not exactly the identity that I would like to root on. You have had a completely different notion of me. Now, that does not happen as frequently as it happens with Indians. Indians have found their voice to move ahead and put down their foot and say that this is no longer the way I want myself to be identified. So there is that difference. There is a difference of opportunities, of demonstrations being made through better life conditions, which is not very common even today in Africa. I hope I've answered your question.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Dr. Nair, you said something like these women, they are exploited by the whites, okay, who entered, fine, but they were also exploited by their own class.
Yes.
Would you please try to explain that? I couldn't
Right.
get the
I got the question. Yes, there has been oppression amongst the clan, the kin and kin inside a clan and tribe, but then there is this difference. How many of us know that most of the African tribes follow a matrilineal system, and there was this togetherness. The term is, it should be very common today. Ubuntu, where sisterhoods existed within the clan, where she could register her complaints against an African man, abusing her. But once the Europeans had made their entry, this was made impossible because the black man himself had lost his voice. So there, the women could not do anything against the white minority. They are still a minority there, but nothing could be done against their overpowering ways of abusive things that they did in that black community. But there were sisterhood clans within a tribe where a black woman could speak against a black man, and they still follow a matrilineal system. So that had their own rooted strength within the clan.
Okay.
I have a question. Can I put a question?
Please, ma'am.
Yes, that's the
Yeah.
last question we'll take.
Yeah. I think, when you're talking about the matrilineal system in the African society,
Yeah.
don't you think that is a bit of a generalization? Because uh, the clans, there would be numerous clans, and the functioning, the methodology within, different clans would be so very different. And of course, it would be, there are instances, there are many African tales where you would see that, women actually assisting another women, to be tortured by their own men.
Okay, ma'am, that is not essentially something that happens only within an African community. That can happen anywhere. A woman against a woman is the greatest, we speak of feminism. But how did radical feminism, emerge? It was because there was no common launch pad from where women could, actually address the atrocities against them, because there were always bifurcations within the feminist movements. The same happens inside every clan. I wouldn't say that the matrilineal system is very comfortable. No, it doesn't. It happens even in Kerala. We still follow, amongst the Nairs, we still follow a matrilineal system. But that doesn't mean that nobody is oppressed here. There might be people who still cannot find their voice. And yes, the clan rules are different, according to the differences in cultural verifications across the clans. But then there is some opportunity where you can address them. At least the sisterhood clans had something to do when a child, when a girl, actually a child of 12 or 13 got pregnant. They would make sure that she got married to that man who was responsible behind that, atrocity. So all these things could be addressed there. I wouldn't say this is a common ground where everything is resolved, but I at least feel it was better than the situations that emerged later as the Europeans, entered Africa.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Nair, for your wonderful paper. And I believe we should move on to the next speaker.
Thank you, sir.
The next speaker is Dr. Kukuvi Mawale Dalmeda. Has he joined? Has he joined, Dr.
Yes,
Kukuvi Mawale Dalmeda?
Dr. Kakubi Maule Dalmeda. Yes.
Okay, Dr. Almeida. He is assistant professor or enseignant chercheur maître assistant Khans, Department of English, Université de Lomé, Togo. And his paper is a reading of Kawakuvi Asazu's The Slave Raiders. So I would request Dr. Kukovi Mawale Dalmeda to make his presentation, please.
Yes. Thank you for giving me the floor and giving me the opportunity to present today, Mr. Chairman. Actually, I am Kakuvi Maule Dalmeda, assistant professor at Université de Lomé, that is West Africa. The paper I'm going to present this afternoon is titled Domesticating the African Novel, a reading of Kwakuvi Azasu's The Slave Raiders. Well, I'm going to be a little bit short because of the time. Domestication plays a key role in the definition and understanding of the African novel. To domesticate is to make something that was originally foreign to fit in the home or domestic context. And in other words, it is the fact of making something which is alien bear a local color. In the context of the African novel, domestication is the process by which African writers adopt European literary traditions, namely setting, plot, characterization, language, to the context of Africa. The way African novelists arrange their subject matter, their ideas and concepts, which they present to the readers, the social habits, the customs, the mode of thought, and the actions. All these are given distinctive qualities and tone that subtly carry the mastery of the culture to whom they belong. The novel as an important genre. That is, the novel is not African. The novel is imported from Europe. Novel as important genre is domesticated to bear African local color. African writers recapture African traditional life, habits, ways of dressing, language, address forms, greetings, conversation techniques, customs, and many more in the novel. While reading The Slave Raiders, the reader, especially the one with a way background, that is the culture of the author, feels at home when reading through the various episodes. Domestication reflects through the various techniques the author uses to deploy his to create his characters and put them in the various environments. So this afternoon, I would like to base my presentation on two major points. Number one, I will talk about how the author, through characterization, has succeeded in making his fiction African fiction, that is African literature. And number two, I will talk about how he has succeeded by reference to time and places, give an African flavor to his narrative. Characterization. Characterization, as we all know, is the way in which a novelist creates a person or persons or actors to suit the circumstances he or she confront them with. The novelist I'm talking about has created the various people that will act in the narration with the purpose of giving an African flavor, an African color to his fiction. I will highlight here some characters and give you an idea of what I mean by domestication. If you take the characters, most of the characters, the major characters in the Slave Raiders, most of them bear African names. These are names you can only find in Africa. Characters such as Togbi Adelaja, Chamiga, Ahwadada, Ajoblasu, Aku, Nyaho, Mama Hudolo, Togbi, Avu, Jega. All these are names which are found in Africa and can only be found in Africa, and especially in the ethnic group of the culture, which being Ewe. So this is the author techniques of giving an African color, an African flavor to his fiction, his novel. The author being from West Africa, Ghana, and the ethnic group he belongs to is Ewe. So the characters he created bears African names. I gave you a list of names which are purely Africans, but these names are also poetic. They have meaning in the author's language, which is Ewe. When I pick one or two characters, Chamigan, for instance, Let me read this extract from the novel to you. It is said in the novel that he was truly the son of an illustrious medicine man. He was himself an herbalist of considerable reputation. This fact was further emphasized by the neatness of the huge cloth he had on his shoulder, which he readjusts at will. There are three things I would like you to see from this short passage from the slave raiders. Number one, the name of the character, which is Chamiga. The name is Ewe. Number two, the dressing of the character. There you see, he was dressed in an African manner. He has a cloth on his shoulder, which he readjusts at a will. Number three, his profession is purely African. He is herbalist. Herbalist. This is African. You will not see somebody in Europe being a herbalist. You will not see anybody. You will not see anybody in Europe dressing with a cloth on his shoulder. You will not see anybody in Europe, any European with this African name. So there is other example, but let me just stop there. So I was saying that the characters are created in such a way that they bear African flavor, they bear African color, so that anybody reading this novel, which has an Ewe background, feel comfortable, feel at home. This is what I call domestication, domesticating the African novel. Apart from the names, the profession, the dressing, there is something the author also portrayed skillfully in his narrative. It is the foods, the foods and the drinking habits of the characters. The food he talked about, he could have made them eating rice, for instance, but Azasu will not do that. He will make them eat yakeke. That is a food made out of cassava. So only a reader who converts with the Ewe background can understand Azasu fully. If the reader is not from Ewe background, he will have all the difficulties in understanding the food the characters are eating. They are eating yakeke, they are drinking cassava. All these are purely African, just to give an African flavor to his writing. If you move further, you will see the worship of these characters and their relation with divinities. There is a major divinity in that novel, which is in Ewe. That is the indigenous African language of the author, Mau Sebolisa. For them, it is the Almighty God. They are calling like that in the Ewe culture. And most of the characters, they evoke this God, which should be addressed through some other divinities. This gives an idea of how things worship are organized in the African traditional society. If you read the same novel, you will find some characters with title, the title of Boko. You find characters like Boko Amusu, Boko Adome, Boko Fuglo, Boko Akakbo, Boko Agozi. They are people endowed with ability to communicate with the divinities. A Boko is a person initiated into the art of divination. That is the ability to tell the future or to excavate the past. So these are things the Africans are familiar to, especially in the African traditional society. So if I leave aside the characterization, that is the construction of the characters. Characters are constructed to embody the Ewe culture the author belongs to. If I move to the setting, that is the time and the place. I'll be very short here, but very concise and precise. When you read the slave raiders, when you read carefully the slave raiders, you will see that places the characters are living in, or the places where the author has made the characters to develop, these places have names, and the names are mostly in Ewe language. That is the culture of the author. You find places like Kliko, you find places like Zume. You will find places like how do you call it, Sobeji. You will find places like Ablochi. All these are names in Ewe. Not only the places they are referred to in the Ewe languages, but these are places that evoke to the reader, which is conversant to the Ewe culture, that this is something happening in Africa. So the author was trying to create a believable story. If you see the way they refer to time, if the characters want to talk about a month ago, for instance, they will say a moon ago, a moon ago. If they want to talk about a week, for instance, they will say after a market day. That is a week for them. If they want to refer to early in the morning, they will say at the first cock crow. At the first cock crow. If they want to say the afternoon, they will look at the shadow of the body, and they will say, when my shadow will reach this level, know that I'm coming, for instance. So these are the way they refer to time. They refer to time in the African ways. The places they are named after the African manners. So all these are ways for the author to give an African color to his fiction. I wanted to add something, but because of time, I will just stop here. I wanted to talk about the language itself, the way the author has incorporated into the text deliberately African words, African concept in order to make the African reader feel at home. So this afternoon, I just wanted to share with you this technique by African writers, which consists in making the African literature has an African color, an African flavor, by creating characters which will look and appear African by their names, by the profession, by the title, by the daily conversation, by the daily activities. They will look African, and then the places where the author put them, in these places they appear Africans. Places also appear African. Where they refer to times is purely African, and this is what Kwakuvi Azasu has succeeded in doing. Thank you for your attention, and I will be more than willing to have your contribution and your questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Professor
Dalmeida.
Almeida, thank you. Yes. For your very interesting paper on domestication of characters in Kawakuvi Asasu's The Slave Raiders. I would now like to open this paper for discussion, for comments, for questions, if there are any. Anybody who probably has any question for Dr. Almeida on his very interesting paper on domestication of characters in Kawakuvi Asasu's The Slave Raiders. Questions, please. Any questions or observations, please?
That was an awesome paper. It is like a window to a world about which we know very little. Certain nuances of the culture seem to be foregrounded through the paper. My question is this, sir. I would only like to know how different is the real situation in Africa from all those represented through the narratives that we keep discussing again and again. Is my question clear?
Yes, clear. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, let me just put it this way. A novel written by an African will portray with much more accuracy than a novel written by a non-African. Because what I'm saying today, the domestication of the characters, the domestication of the language, the domestication of the places, it is only somebody conversant with the African realities that can succeed in fully understanding what Kwakuvi Azasu was doing. Much of the African writers, they write in order to portray the realities. They want to be close to the situation in Africa. Here in Azasu's slave raiders, he tried to portray the situation of the Africans, their worship, their everyday life, their everyday activities, the relation between men and women, how women are abused by men, how the men are abused by the white men. But when it is written by an African, it is much more believable situation than a fiction produced by a non-African. I don't know whether I've been clear enough.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Almeida. Are there any other questions for him? If not, we shall move on to the next speaker. And the next speaker is
Sir.
Yes, please.
So this is Saannay, and I want to say that we need to look about the time. The time is slot is yes.
10 minutes. Okay, fine. Dr. Mustabshira Siddiqui, Assistant Professor, Department of English, Taiba University, Saudi Arabia. Is Dr. Siddiqui here?
Yes, sir.
Yes, Dr. Siddiqui, please present your paper.
Am I audible to you all?
Yes, you are perfectly audible.
Okay, so I actually talked about African theatre, how we see the outcome of this culture, this after African Renaissance took place in 1950s. So it's like coming back to the culture and the notion of orature, the oral literature, which was famous for this African culture. And I basically discussed three very famous milestones. They are Chinua Achebe, Ngugi Thiong'o, and Wole Soyinka. And I also included Nelson Mandela, who is very famous for his first speech as a president when he said, "I know the people of my country." I want to quote him and then begin my paper like this, that he said, "I know the people of my country. No one is born hating each other. People learn to hate, and they can be taught to love because love is more natural to the human heart." And that's what he inculcated into the African generation, which was getting violent in those days because of the oppression of the black people. And people were like, we have Ngugi wa Thiong'o, who has written this essay, The Abolishment of English Department, and he declared that he will not write in English language. and he adopted Gikuyu and Swahili, which is the native language. And we have Decolonizing the Mind, written by Ngugi wa Thiong'o. And with decolonization of the mind, Gugi basically wanted the people to adopt the lost culture, the orature, the idea of the traditions which were followed by the African people. They used to, like, we have Chinua Achebe, who in his groundbreaking work has written Things Fall Apart, and he has shown this man. He is this. We have the central character in this Igbo community, and he believes this in Igbo traditional beliefs, this culture, where he could not relate himself and he commits suicide. It's like, falling apart of the culture which is shown by Chinua Achebe. And then we see Wole Soyinka coming into, coming with this idea of celebration of the independence of African culture, Africa, with his The Dance of the Forest, in which he tries to tell people that we should not forget the martyrs of the independence, the people who are dead. It's like a tribute to the dead people who gave their blood and soul to this country, Africa, to bring back the culture which was lost by them. So I have taken these people into account who are the pioneers and like milestones who actually project the complete African culture in their books, and they try to decolonize. They try to, it's like a complete post-colonial world which we see here. And I have discussed these people a little widely. Like I have discussed that this we have Gugi, who suffered a lot in the Mau Mau rebellion. Everybody has their own, their share in the independence and upgradation of the culture of Africa. And we have this shown in his works. The next two names are Chinua Achebe, Wole Soyinka. And Achebe has, I want to quote Achebe where he said, if you don't like someone's story, write your own. By this statement, he's actually asking his people to write their own story. They should not become the imitators of the white people. This is how we understand post-colonialism in India. Like it is the mimicry, according to Homi Bhabha, that the Indian people did. Like it's like an imitation of the English people, and then appropriate their language and culture, and then it's like a writing back to them. Like we have Ashcroft, Gareth Griffin's, and Helen Tiffin's book, The Empire Writes Back. So here we see he is asking people to write their own story, write their own culture, write themselves, their own minds. And on the other hand, we have Ngugi wa Thiong'o asking them to decolonize their mind. It's like a transition from colonial to post-colonial. So they need to decolonize, they need to write their own language, though he has to come back to the English language again later on. First he, abolished it, and then he had to come back because it had become such a culture that there was no way just to adopt it. It's like even today we are talking in this English language. We don't have any other language to pass comments on or meet on a global platform. It has been instilled into us so much. Even today, when we talk about decolonization, decolonizing the mind, the post-colonial space, and we are in the post-modern world and post-postmodern world, we can call it. But still, we are, communicating this language. So he has to come back into this language and again talk into it. And even when we look at Nelson Mandela in his first speech, what he wanted to ask his people was that we should not be violent, because we have to we have to upgrade our culture, and the culture and the traditions cannot be upgraded or brought back by violence or by bloodshed. We have to behave in a loving manner. We have to inculcate the values in our children, so that they actually preserve this culture and not by violence but by love. So we have I actually I'm very much into this idea of African culture being brought back by these people rather than what happened, because we can undo what happened. So it's like the paper, I don't want to read the thing, like a reading session, but I just wanted to tell you the things which I have discussed in my paper. So basically I have taken these 3-4 people into account: Gogi Wathiango, and I have taken into account Chinua Achebe and Wole Soyinka and Nelson Mandela, and I have tried to focus on the idea of African culture being upgraded or being brought back, or kind of a rebirth instilled in these 1950s and 60s and 70s times, and how they tried to paint it on the entire world's map, this African culture. We're still reading it in our curriculums and teaching it to the students like this. We remember the African culture and orature and everything like this. So we have this idea. That's it. That I don't want to say much, because everything is there in the paper. The Black identity is actually, preserved by these 4 people in a very, you know, in a very nice and particular way. Wole Soyinka was a political leader. He was a playwright, a poet, and a great orator. So all these people combine, and we have their sacrifices, their lot of their hard work in front of us, and we should, I think, preserve that.
Thank you, Dr. Mustafshira Siddiqui, for this rather illuminating presentation of the rebirth of African culture in African theatre, in the works of the 4 dramatists that you have taken. And I would like to open this paper for discussion. If there are any questions or comments, please, for Dr. Siddiqui. It is open for discussion. Please, any questions, any comments, any observations? It has been a very interesting paper.
I want to say one thing, that I would recommend you all to please go through Nelson Mandela's autobiography, A Long Walk to Freedom. It's wonderful. We learn a lot from it about African culture.
Okay.
Thank you.
We shall then move on.
Thank you.
Yes, please. Somebody said
Thank
something?
you so much, Doctor.
No, this is a nice presentation. I love it. What I want to say is that when Ngugu said he recommend people to decolonize their mind and that he will not write in English, you can see that he didn't succeed in stepping away from English. He tried, but he came back to English, and you know that Ngugi, after all, he spent he's now in the United States, so he couldn't cut off from the colonizers. So what I'm I'm asking, or the contribution I'm making, is that since they were not able to change the language of the African literature, what they have succeeded in doing is that they have succeeded in mixing the languages. They mix English and the indigenous languages, and they did deliberately. They incorporated in the text the African languages. That's a way for them to promote the African culture and the African realities. Thank you.
Yeah, same. Yeah, just like with that in India, because all the people who used to know Sanskrit and other languages in India, they have to write the Ramayana and the Mahabharata into English language to tell them that we also have our own traditions and we also have our own culture. We don't have to follow your culture and your traditions, and we have to write in English to tell them. That's what I like about it.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Siddiqui. We move on to the next speaker, that is SR Dr. Mary J.N. Okolie, Department of English and Literary Studies, University of Nigeria, Nsukka. Dr. Okulie is, Dr. Mary Okulie, is she here? Dr. Mary Okulie, is she here? Has she joined?
No, sir. She hasn't joined.
Okay, then we move on to the next speaker, Dr. Aarti Nirmal. Dr. Aarti Nirmal, she is Assistant Professor of English, Benares Hindu University, and she is speaking on Chinua Achebe, Writing, Nation and Identity. I would invite Dr. Aarti Nirmal to present her paper, please. Dr. Nirmal.
Yeah. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Hope I'm audible to all of you.
Yes, you're absolutely.
All right. So I'm going to speak on Chinua Achebe, Writing, Nation and Identity. And the previous speaker and the comments and observations after that have made my task a bit easy, because when we talk about writing, we are talking about language. And the previous speaker very well pointed out that how there was a kind of debate between African writers as well regarding whether to choose English language for their literary articulation or the native one. And as we know that Yuki spoke in favor of English, whereas Achebe said that it would be, he chose to write in English, and the justification was that we would be in a position to address to the global audience and articulate our issues better if we write in English. But it would not be English of the colonizers, the masters. Let us customize English in African way, with African myths, African proverbs and terms and so on. So in this presentation, I am going to talk particularly about one work. See, we all know that Chinua Achebe is not only a wonderful novelist, but he is a phenomenal critic as well. So in my presentation, I'm going to focus on his collection of essays, and the title is Hopes and Impediments. However, in his novels too, he has talked about his theory of writing, but in his essays, he has articulated it in. I see some problem on this screen. Okay. So in this essay, there are altogether, in this book, there are altogether 13 essays. And for my purpose, I have chosen some of them. Excuse me, am I visible? Because I see some pop-ups on my screen. Am I visible right now?
No.
No. I think it's.
I can hear you.
Okay, fine.
Yes,
okay, fine.
Yes, it is visible
so
now.
Yes, there are 13 essays in total in this volume, but I have chosen a few of them. The very first essay is An Image of Africa, Racism in Conrad's Heart of Darkness, Impediments to Dialogue Between North and South, The Novelist as Teacher, The Writer and His Community, Colonialist Criticism, Language and the Destiny of Man, The Truth of Fiction. On the basis of my reading of these essays, what I see is that Achebe has serious reservations, and rather he would prefer to ban these three terms. One is universality, another is individuality, and third one is social collectivism. Why he feels to get away of these three terms, these three concepts, because these are all essentialist in nature. And like other African authors, and you know that he is a towering figure, a man of letter in African literature, no doubt. So he published his first book, The Things Fall Apart, and as one of the previous speakers has already talked about that, I will not go into the detail. But he is of the view that when the writer is writing a novel, writing of fiction is not just something which is altogether fictional. Fiction writing is also a kind of culture writing. So when an author writes a book, when a novelist writes a novel, in the process of writing, he writes the culture as well. With this view in the collection, the first essay is an image of Africa, racism in Conrad's Heart of Darkness. He says that in almost all the universities of the West, this book has been prescribed. And in many of the universities of third world countries as well, it is there and it is appreciated, it is discussed and acknowledged. But he says that I find a kind of racist perspective of the author in the writing. And the disparaging, humiliating picture which Conrad has drawn in this novella, Achebe has serious objection against that. Since we have very little time, I'm just trying to give a gist of what I have written in this paper. Next important thing is that he said that there is an integral relationship between the writer and his community. There can be no author, or the writing of the author would be of no significance if it is detached from the society in which he lives. He is particularly a humanist, and therefore he lays much emphasis on the role of the author in the nation building. And as we can see that he is not only theorizing these things, but he has practiced it also in his writings, because through his writings he has tried to regain the lost paradise. And he has tried to re-establish and redefine and also reinvent the cultural, the traditional, the national, the linguistic identity of Africa. I have divided my paper in 4 or 5 sections, but for my convenience here, I will just read certain extracts from each section. So after introduction, the first part is Achebe's post-colonial turn. Many of us know that he was pursuing his education in a European university, and he was indulged in reading the great English writers, but he happened to read the book Mr. Johnson, which was published in 1939 and written by Joyce Carey. And when he reads that book, he comes across a highly dehumanizing depiction of Africa. The very designation of Africa as a dark continent and a consideration of African people as inhuman, like as if they are not human beings, and the taboos, the stereotypes which have been associated with them, it was a kind of eye-opener for him. And therefore, he feels that it was necessary for him to come out, to find a solution, find a way out to be relieved from the cultural crossroads where he was standing. And therefore, whether it is his role as a teacher or as a writer, his effort is to re-establish Africa with all its originality. I'm just reading some portions from it. For example, Carey portrays African people as, I quote, jealous savages, live like mice and rats in a palace floor. Dancers are grinning, shrieking, scowling, or with faces which seemed entirely dislocated, senseless and unhuman, like twisted bag of lards. So it informed Achebe about the miseries and predicaments of Nigerian people under European hegemonic rule. I skip certain portions from this. Yes. Joseph Conrad is writing in Heart of Darkness about African people, shadows of disease, he's calling them shadows of disease, a certain enormous buck nigger, the poor devil, a black figure stood up strode on long back legs, waving long black arms, as opposed to his unforgettable Englishman. Now, there has been immense amount of debate, and there are some scholars who stand with Conrad, and they say that Achebe's perception or reading of the text is guided by some of his own conditionings in the mind. But the close reading certainly shows that he was as if standing to the side of the Europeans rather than speaking for the African people. I move ahead. I would like to quote here from one of the scholars from Senegal, Sheikh Hamidou Kane, who writes in his novel Ambiguous Adventure regarding the attack of Western thought on the history of Africa in these words. I quote, "It seems to me that this history has undergone an accident which has shifted it and finally drawn it away from its plan." When we talk about colonial discourse or post-colonial discourse, then if we look at the history of colonization, then we see how the Christian missionaries, they in the name of they followed the doctrine through the doctrine of papal bull, terra nullius, or later on capitulation. They not only tried to acquire the geographical territories, the lands, but they also tried to kill the indigeneity of the people. Raymond Gasfugel talks about, he uses one word, epistemicide, and we all know that how this process of colonization, this entire imperialism was, which began as a commercial process, which began as an industrial, began with an industrial motive. Later on, from commerce, it moves to culture, and it altogether becomes a civilizational process. So it not only tried to kill the originality of the people, the indigenous art, tradition, culture, myth, narrative of the people, but also in a way, the knowledge, the native knowledge was also underestimated, and over the period of time, it was replaced. But however, it is not the sole purpose of my discussion here, but I cannot move ahead without mentioning that when the writer is writing, then the writer is also foregrounding certain such facts which have been shrouded or which have been pushed aside or to the margin over the period of time. So in view of Achebe, it is the role of the author not only to depict the reality, but also to as Aristotle says, and not only to present how things have happened or things are happening or how things ought to be. So there should be a kind of vision, and therefore he calls the authors as the leaders of the society. According to him, they are the leaders, and they have that potential to transform the nation's future through their writing. And therefore, the entire theory of writing, which Achebe talks about in all his essays, in different ways he has put these ideas, he is focusing on how important, how significant role the author can play in African society. I move ahead. There is one interesting thing. He says that there is an urgent need to unlearn that which has been made to be learned so far. So as I was talking about epistemicide, it is like genocide, it is like homicide. So it is the killing of the indigenous knowledge, the murder of the indigenous knowledge. So he says that how can we change things? How can we make our own things alive? It is through unlearning what we have learned so far. So that partial knowledge, that one-sided knowledge, that prejudiced knowledge which has been imposed upon us, we need to defy it. And then only after unlearning that, we can indulge into right kind of learning or learning of the new things in right way. Then I skip certain things, and he talks about language, he talks about words, and he says that word is akin to God. And in different religious traditions too, it has been compared to God. Even in our Indian tradition, we have Nad Brahma. So sound or voice or word is equivalent to divine. So he also taking reference to the beliefs and tradition and the linguistic pattern of his own society. He emphasizes on this view that how the myths that we talk about, the legend which we refer to, they are not altogether imaginative things. These are the treasures, these are the legacy which our ancestors, our forefathers have encoded and transferred to the next generation. So word is very important, and therefore he said that I lay emphasis on how through the power of word, the massive change, radical change can be brought in human society and particularly African society. One segment of my paper which I would like to focus particularly here is the title is The Culture of Writing and the Writing of Culture. I have already talked about it, but what he is saying in this book, I would like to focus on that. While reflecting deep on the African novel, Achebe underlines it again and again that a true African novel is not only, within quotes, a geographical expression, but again within quotes, it is also a metaphysical landscape. It is in fact a view of the world and the whole cosmos perceived from a particular position. So it is not only a geographical space, but it is a metaphysical space for him. He remarks later on in the same book, Hopes and Impediments, in spite of all temptations, he is referring here to Joseph Conrad's book, and he says, in spite of all temptations, he remained an Englishman. As I said, that he observes Conrad to be racist in his viewpoint regarding Africa, and he said that is not the duty of an author. What Conrad has done, it is not the. He also refers to V.S. Naipaul at one place in this book, and he says that the injustice which Naipaul did to India and Africa, the same has been done by Joseph Conrad in this book. So he says that that is not the duty of an author. The duty of an author is to present things as they are without stereotyping, without any bias or prejudice. And then he says, writing is impossible without language, and language is a huge identity marker. So therefore, I said that in the history of writing, language is playing a very important role. We need to ponder here over the question that on what basis do we say that this particular language is African, Indian, Russian, or any other? It is chiefly on account of how well it articulates the spirit of the soil it is produced in and it speaks about it. So as we had the discussion before my talk, as other speakers were discussing, that language, so whether it is English or it is a native language or any other language, see, English has no doubt become a language of convenience. It is a lingua franca. We will have to accept that. And it has not to be seen nowadays as a language of the ruler or the colonizer. It is a language of trade. It is a language of connectivity. So, however, this language is very important. So how will you say whether it is Indian language or Russian language or African language? I may write in my native language, but it does not carry that spirit, that ethos of the soil in which it is written. And it would not be an English, in an Indian language or Hindi language. So he says that the language which carries the scent, the fragrance of its soil, which is able to articulate the spirit of that land, that would be considered as the language of. So it can be any language if you are using, and if you are able to articulate what you purport to articulate, particularly its spirits, its thoughts, its culture, its tradition, then certainly it is an important identity marker of that place.
Excuse me, Dr. Nirmal. Nirmal, I would ask you to conclude.
Just 2 minutes. 2 minutes to conclude. Will it be fine? Yeah, I understand. So he is against the dogma of universality, as I said in the very beginning. And in his last novel, Anthems of the Savannah, also he refers to myth, history, and orality and its significance in the writing. And I would just read the last part of it. I'm just quoting from one of his works, and then I will conclude here. Achebe says, it is this story, as somebody said, that he emphasized a lot on is writing of story. So you write your own story, and that is what he expects from the novelist too. He says, it is the story that saves our progeny from blundering like blind beggars into the spikes of the cactus fence. The story is our escort. Without it, we are blind. It is the story that owns us and directs us. It is the thing that makes us different from cattle, that sets one people apart from their neighbors. In this story, our struggle will stand reincarnated for us. So story is very important in his view, and that is why he says that the aim of writing, the purpose of writing should be to tell honestly, to narrate the story of humanity. I conclude here. I have submitted the entire paper. If you have any questions, then we can proceed with the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nirmal, for this wonderful paper on the essays of Chinua Achebe and the racist problem that he expounds, presents in his essays. Does anyone have any question for Dr. Nirmal? Any observation on her paper? Any comments, any observations on her paper? In that case, we move on to the next speaker, that is Dr. Kalpalata. Are you there, ma'am? Dr. Kalpalata, are you here?
Yes, sir, I am there.
Okay, Dr. Kalpalata. Dr. Kalpalata is Assistant Professor, the English and Foreign Languages University, Hyderabad, EFL University campus, and her topic is Violent Bodies in Le Clasio's The African, 2004. Dr. Kalpalata, you may.
Sir, can you see my screen?
Yes, you can please make your presentation.
Sir, everybody can see my screen?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
The PowerPoint presentation is visible.
Okay, thank you. My name is Kalpalata and I'm from English and Foreign Languages University, Hyderabad. The topic, the title of my paper is Le Clasio, Violent Bodies in Le Clasio the African. J.M.G. Le Clasio is a writer and professor of French and Mauritian origin, and he has received Nobel Prize in 2008 for his life's work. After being witness to the violent and fearful France amidst the Second World War, Le Clasio reaches Nigeria, Ogoza, a world far, far away, where he finds himself in conversation with African bodies, which unfurls the meaning of freedom to him. From the comfort of his grandmother's home in Nice, France, where he had got habituated to a life of fear and confinement, Le Clasio arrives in 1948 in Nigeria, Ogoza, a new world with new definitions. Africa embraces him in her arms and narrates an empowering new story that erases all his previous stories. For Clasio, the land of Africa is mystical, powerful, and engaging, which would mesmerize each day of his childhood to unfurl the mysteries of nature, and each day Le Clasio would find himself imbibing the nature's attributes into his own being. As opposed to France, where he was among his white people and yet was engulfed in a sense of isolation, fear, and confinement. In Nigeria, West Africa, where he goes to live at the age of 8, there are no Europeans apart from his mother and father, and nonetheless finds extreme closeness among the African bodies, among the Igbo and Yoruba people that would also ensure him of a heaven, a world without fear. In France, Le Clasio was familiar with only one kind of man-made dwelling, the apartments, where he had found an anemic comfort amidst the exterior unrest created by the German soldiers. Ogoza, on the other hand, introduced him to a new type of man-made dwelling, which was unsophisticated and closer to nature. He describes his house in Ogoza as cabin. As Le Clasio describes in his cabin, there weren't any mirrors nor any pictures, thus making this space without any reference, aiding him to create a present without any memory. Reminiscent of this space without memory, Le Clasio says, and I quote, "That's where I learned to forget. It seems to me that the erasing of my face and of all the faces around me dates back to the moment I entered that cabin in Ogaza, unquote. From discovering the outside world which presents itself as an alternative reality to him, he is made aware of his own body. He is now made conscious of his own body, the body which did not know the language of other than fear in France. In Ogaza, his body learns the new language of freedom. It is by observing the other free bodies that he discovers his freedom. This bodily freedom comes from seeing the bare African body, the bodies of African women walking past the house with their heavy breasts and its shiny skin. Leclerc is acquainted with the truth of the body with all its ugliness and beauty. The sensuous body with its bare truth that Leclerc sees in Africa was hidden in France inside the girdles, petticoats, the brassieres and slips of women. Inside these European clothes, the ultimate bodily truth of the body was hidden from him, the aging. It was as if the European bodies were exempt from the disease of aging. Africa reveals the secret of the aging body. Leclerc recounts his acquaintance with the aging body when he reaches Ogozo in 1948. The moment his family reaches, they are surrounded by a crowd. He is surrounded by a crowd, but he is not afraid of this crowd. In this crowd, he sees an old woman. Leclerc did not know that she was old, but he observes that she was different from other naked children, men and women of Ogozo. By virtue of being different from others in the crowd and being old, Leclerc assumes that she is sick. For Leclerc, the truth of old age did not exist. The illusionary European body had never presented itself as old. In France, old age was a disease better to be kept hidden from the outside world. It was the truth of the old and wrinkled body that he is exposed for the first time in Ogazo, and which surprises him so much, so that he asks his mother if that old lady was sick. Her mother responds that she is not sick, but just old. But the bare truth of the old body does not horrify him, neither it evokes a feeling of pity for the woman, but instead, he is caught with a feeling of love and interest, having glimpsed the truth of the human body. For Leclerc, the African man is a reflection of its nature. The freedom displayed by the African body takes its inspiration from its vast nature. It is violent, extreme, and aplenty with sensations. The author is reminded of the blisters of his body inflicted by prickly heat. In this heat, sprinkled with talcum powder. To bear the humid air, he imagines his body to be a fish coated with flour, ready to be fried into the frying pan. The pain that the equatorial heat is inflicting upon his body is making him aware of his bodily existence. This bodily pain has erased all his other painful memory of war in France and has prepared him to construct a new memory and a new corporal identity. He says, and I quote, "Africa was already taking my face away and giving me a painful, feverish body in return. The body that France had hidden from me in the anemic comfort of my grandmother's home, devoid of instinct, devoid of freedom." In this world, the man and nature disseminated nothing but freedom and taught Leclerc nothing but freedom. In this world, the body reigned supreme and was boundless. The nature was limitless, where every entity had a meaning, purpose, and was utilized. The nature was violent and loud, but this violence is not secretive and it does not terrify Leclerc. It is fierce, independent, and unapologetic, and makes Leclerc's body tingle, unlike the violence in France, which was secret, hypocritical, terrifying violence that all children born in the middle of a war are familiar with. Leclerc finds the tingling African violence everywhere. It is in the thunderstorms, in the lightning, and in the red wild wind, which bends the tall trees around the garden, ripping the palm leaves from the roof, sleeping under the doors to whirl around the dining room and blow out the wall lamps. The electrical and powerful Africa fills the author with enthusiasm. Africa for him is not a training ground for racial awareness. It is merely a ground where his body absorbs freedom into his being from its fierce surroundings. It was in this limitless, unorganized, free world, without any rules and without any friends, that Leclerc learns to breathe, to live, and to speak, and where his body flourishes, unlike in France, where his body fell sick by the muted and the hidden violence of the war. It was amidst the forces of the nature that he lives the moments of his wild, free, almost dangerous life, of freedom of movement, of thought, and of emotions that he had never known since. In the end, I would like to say, from the silent, hidden, and harmful violence of the Second World War in Nice, France, a child of 8 years enters into the loud, open, real, powerful, but nurturing, protecting, and forgiving lap of Mother Nature in Africa. This world would define Leclerc's body and expression for the rest of his life. This fierce and independent Africa would teach him the freedom of expression, which would translate into his writing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kalpalata, on your wonderful paper on Leclerc's The Africa, where you have analyzed the vision of violence in bodies in Africa, which was so different from the violence of the Second World War, which he had perhaps witnessed in France. Any questions on Dr. Kalpalata's paper? Any observations? Any comments? Please, any questions, comments, or observations on Dr. Kalpalata's paper? It has been a very precise paper on Leclerc's The African. Any other comments, please? Then should we move on to the next speaker? Do we have Dr. Nagaratna V. Parande here? Do we have Dr. Nagaratna V. Parande here with us? Dr. Nagaratna V. Parande? Saannay, has he joined? Has she joined? Nagaratna V. Parande? Saannay?
Sir.
Yes, please.
I think he's not present.
Dr. Nagaratna V. Parande. Then we should move on to the next speaker, Dr. Sangeeta Jain. Dr. Sangeeta Jain, are you there, ma'am? Dr. Sangeeta Jain, are you there, ma'am? Dr. Sangeeta Jain? I thought Dr. Sangeeta Jain was there. Yes, please.
She's here.
Oh, she's here. Dr. Jain is Associate Professor of English, DAV Postgraduate College, Varanasi, and she's speaking on Yoruba cosmology and mythology in Vol Soyinka's The Road. Dr. Sangeeta Jain, please make your presentation. I invite you to make your presentation, please. Dr. Jain, can you hear me? Dr. Jain, can you hear me?
I think there's something wrong with the speaker. She's on. She's unmuted.
Yes. Could you...
Dr. Jain?
Yes, you are in the list.
Your microphone might have a problem. Remove the headphone.
Dr. Jain, we can't hear you.
She shouldn't use the headphone. It will be okay. Yeah, good.
Dr. Jain, we can see you, but we can't hear you. You are inaudible, apparently.
You remove the headphone from your ears, but out of the computer. Did you take it out of the computer?
Dr. Jain, we cannot hear you.
Dr. Jain, you are there. We can see you on the on our screen, but we cannot hear you. Anything wrong with your connection, ma'am? Can you hear us? Saannay, am I audible to you?
Yes, yes, sir. Ma'am,
Is there a
please
problem?
mute once more and again unmute yourself. I think it will work then. No, ma'am, we cannot hear you.
Should we move on to the next speaker and allow some time for Dr. Jain to adjust her connection, is it? Dr. Jain, have you been able to adjust your microphone?
Yes, sir. I think she is having some technical problem.
Should we give you some more time to solve your technical problem while we get on with the next speaker? I think that would be wise. We'll go to get on with the next speaker, then we'll come back to Dr. Jain once again. Dr. Syed Mujahid, are you there? Dr. Syed Mujahid, Faculty of English, Vikramasimhapuri University, Andhra Pradesh. Dr. Syed Mujahid, are you there? Dr. Syed Mujahid, are you there?
No, sir.
Chandra, has Dr.
No,
Syed?
sir. He's not with us right now.
Dr. Trina Sadhu of Vishwabharati Shantiniketan, are you there? Dr. Trina Sadhu of Vishwabharati Shantiniketan, are you there? I thought Dr. Trina Sadhu had joined. Dr.
Yes.
Trina Sadhu? Dr. Trina Sadhu of Vishwabharati Shantiniketan? Dr. Trina Sadhu of Vishwabharati Shantiniketan? Can you hear me? Is it that I have become inaudible?
No, sir. You are audible.
You're very audible. You're very audible. Maybe they are having problems with the net connectivity issues.
Could be. Dr. Trina Sadhu?
Hello.
Yes,
Hello?
ma'am, we can hear you, Dr. Sangeeta.
Now you can hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, yes.
ma'am.
So
Okay, now I have.
Yes.
you are Dr. Sangeeta Jain?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So Dr. Sangeeta Jain has come, and we'll hear her paper first, and then we'll move on to Dr. Trina Sadhu. Dr. Sangeeta, yes, she's Associate Professor of English of DAV PG College. Okay, Dr. Jain, you can please make the presentation. Dr. Jain,
Okay, sir, thank you.
You can please make your presentation.
Okay, sir. Okay, thank you. Am I audible now?
Yes, you're perfectly audible.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you very much. The topic of my presentation today is Yoruba cosmology and mythology in Wole Soyinka's The Road. The first African to receive the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1986 is Ekinwande Oluwole Babatunde Soyinka, known as Wole Soyinka. The Nobel Prize to an African writer is a presumptive evidence that Anglo-centric world or European world has accepted the existence of the indigenous literary treasure of African world, hitherto popularized as Dark Continent. Now, African literature has been introduced under the rubric term of new literatures in English as part of the syllabus of English literature courses. The emergence and acceptance of African literature in international literary coterie is the visionary approach of African writers like Wole Soyinka, Chinua Achebe, and many other prolific poets, novelists, dramatists, writing in many African and European languages. Wole Soyinka has made Yoruba culture the backbone of his literary output to create the African hermeneutics for the world to understand the continent, Africa, in its indigenous perspective. The Road, which was published in 1965, is a complex tragicomedy with mythic plot and weaves many diverse thematic strands into one complicated dramatic form. It interpolates traditional Yoruba cosmology, mythology, rituals, and post-colonial issues with Western dramatic form and style. It is a superb accomplishment of Soyinka as a dramatist and brilliantly exposes the profoundly pessimistic view of human condition. The narrative is a professor searches for the mysterious word, putting a magnifying glass over newspapers. He is also in search of death, causing accidental deaths on roads by uprooting the milestones to run an accident store, collecting the leftovers from accident sites. He also forges a license for the truck and lorry drivers. He keeps mute Morano, the embodiment of death, to know the mystery of death. Finally, he was killed during E Gungun, an African dance ritual at the end of the play. Now, Yoruba religion is a major African religion based in Nigeria. Over 25 million Yoruba people are there, and there are more than 400 deities with different roles. They respect ancestors, and they believe that a spirit lives after death and reincarnates in blood relatives. Moments in life can be predicted. Yoruba cosmology, it separates the cosmos into two worlds, the human world, the world of deities. The human world contains manifestations of the ancestors, the living, and the unborn. In the Yoruba world, a community's collective sense, they collectively believe that it has complex ties to the ancestral community and to the unborn community. When characters in the play wear the mask, they feel possessed by the ancestral spirits. Yoruba myths, Yoruba mythology. Yoruba myths are stories about the efforts made to cross the gulfs between human and divine existence and between the existence of dead, living, and unborn. Ogun, the god of iron and of metallurgic lore and artistry, was the first to succeed in conquering the gulf or transition. Ogun is also, Soinka explains, the god of creativity, guardian of the road, explorer, hunter, god of war, custodian of the sacred oath. Professor is symbol of Ogun's duality, as on one side, he is an explorer of the unexplored, and on the other side, he is an exploiter. He is a Sunday school teacher and also the god of death, that is Ogun. Professor tries to bridge this gulf through his part psychic, part intellectual group towards the essence of death. Yoruba rituals are the external manifestations of Yoruba myths. The main Yoruba rituals projected through the play are Ajimo. What is Ajimo? It is a mere phase of transition from the human to the divine essence. Morano dies in this Ajimo phase and is therefore in a state of suspension, hanging between world of living and dead. Egungun. The concept of Egungun festival is from Yoruba culture. Its main function is to deal with the worship and appeasement of the dead. Professor is killed for his sacrilege of Egungun. Masquerade. The great masks are impersonations of ancestors. They are sacrosanct, and to touch them could mean death. The play ends with the spinning movement of the mask till it is reduced to be nothing beyond a heap of cloth and raffia. So finally, The Road is a complex play because it incorporates traditional myths and rituals of Africa with Western dramatic technique to convey modern themes mixing English and Yoruba languages. Shoinka's main concern as a responsible creative genius is to stir the human consciousness towards the deterioration of humanity through his amalgamation of African cosmology, mythology, and rituals with dramatic form. So I would like to show you two slides. Am I audible? Hello?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I would like to show you just two slides where I'll show you. Is it visible? Is it visible?
Yes, it is visible.
Yes. So this is the mask. In the center, you will find the Ogun, and this is the mask. So when they wear mask, they feel possessed. In the play, it has been shown when they wear the mask of their ancestors, they feel possessed by the spirits. And this is Egungun dance ritual. So devotion to ancestors. Egungun refers to the Yoruba masqueraders connected with ancestors' reverence or to the ancestors themselves as a collective force. So this is the picture where you will find a person is covering from head to toe. From covering head.
Then she's gone offline, is it?
So this everything has been discussed in the play, and the play ends with the reference to Egungun. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sangeeta Jain. It has been a very interesting paper about something that was something that is quite exotic, mythical, and traditional. And you see, Yoruba cosmology, with which probably Wole Soyinka brings in some modern themes as well. It's a reflection of modern themes in something exotic, mythical, and traditional. It's a very interesting paper, which we look forward to reading. But
okay,
does anyone have any questions? Any observations on Dr. Sangeeta Jain's paper, please? Any comments to make on Dr. Jain's paper? Okay, then in that case, we'll move on to the next speaker. Do we have Dr. Syed Mujahid here? Do we have Dr. Syed Mujahid? Faculty member of Dikrama Simapur University. Do we have Dr. Syed Mujahid?
देखा मेरी हर काम में इतनी सारी अड़चन आती है ना हमेशा जिस दिन कॉलेज झगड़ा हो गया बच गया
Do we have Dr. Syed Mujahid?
No, sir.
No, in that case, we move on to Dr. Trina Sadhu.
Dr. Tirna Sadhu.
Dr. Tirna Sadhu, please. Are you there, ma'am? We had
am I audible? Sir, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible. Dr. Tirna Sadhu is from Vishwabharati Shantiniketan, West Bengal, India, and she's speaking on every African writer in two people, analyzing through selected texts the role played by war and immigration in creating such a reality.
Sir, your voice is cracking. Hello?
Oh, is that so? Now am I audible? Now am I clear?
No, you're not clear. Your voice is cracking. Sir, would you permit me to switch off my camera, because here it's raining heavily and I may have soon connectivity issues. So can I keep my camera off?
Okay, doesn't matter. You can keep it on.
We can hear you perfectly, ma'am. You can proceed.
Hello?
Yes, you can proceed. We can hear you.
Every now and then the connection is abrupted. So just can I keep my camera off and keep the microphone on?
Yes, you can do that. You can do that. No problem. You can do that. No problem. Hello? Hello, Tirna, you can do that. There is no problem. You can keep your microphone on and your camera off. You were being audible. What has happened? Tirna, we can hear you. We could have, I mean, now you're inaudible. We can't hear you anymore. But when you spoke earlier, we could hear you.
So I think it is the network problem.
Yes, but she's there. I mean, would she like to present?
She left this session. I think she will join again. Then we can proceed. Can we move to the next speaker?
The next speaker is Sarah Grace John. Sarah, are you there? Sarah, are you there? Please. We had you on the screen. Sarah Grace John. Sarah, are you there, please? Sarah?
Sarah was here a minute ago. Sarah, are you there, please? Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
So, Sarah, are you there, please? Sarah, are you there?
She was here
Sarah,
just a moment ago, I think.
She was here just a minute ago. Yes. Why
I think
has she left?
she will join again.
Yes. Dr. Sangeeta Jain has joined. Trina, are you there? Trina?
Tirna, sir.
Tirna, are you there?
No, sir, she is not here.
So in that case, we should move on to the next speaker, that is Saannay. Saannay, would you like to present your paper?
Okay, sir. I can.
Saannay, am I audible and visible as well?
Yes.
Just keep an eye on.
Sarah Grace John has joined now.
Oh, Sarah has joined.
I think accidentally Dr. Debashish Sengupta has left the session and he will join soon.
Hello. Hello.
Dr. Tirna Sadhu,
Yes,
you're with
hello?
us. You can you hear us?
I rejoined. Actually, the connection was totally disrupted.
Okay, now is it okay?
Yeah, now it's fine. So shall I
sir.
restart? Shall I begin again?
Please do.
Yes. Okay. So as the first part of my title, it mentions that every African writer is two people. So in order to explain this part, I shall quote Peter Godwin. He says, I feel to that the gap between is stretching into a gulf. My head bulges with the effort to contain both worlds. When I am back in New York, Africa immediately seems fantastical. A widely plumaged bird, as exotic as it is unlikely. Okay. Now, this part of the quote and the first part of my title, what I actually wanted to mean is each and every African writer, they are attempting incessantly to unite their individual self and country, which has been torn apart by despair, disillusionment, and irrationality introduced by war and perpetuated by immigration in the wake of post-independence. Time and again, there are conflicts of faith in the new wilderness. While they are trying to acculturate with the new values, and at the same time, they're remembering their homelands. The cultural dominance and the inequality has given rise to the whole new panorama of suffering and meaninglessness. Now, the narratives, in the narratives which I shall be pointing out, there is reference to travel and transformation, which has become an unavoidable part because it juxtaposes both the brave and personal accounts of the authors within the wider context of devastation and displacement, all of which forced Africans to travel to and from different geographical locations, thereby making transformation inevitable. The narratives should also focus on the fact that the authors, they kept on attempting to unpuzzle their complicated, struggling, and split identities by attempting to write out their realities. Apart from this, the forceful displacement and the subsequent ruthlessness, which has been triggered by war, violence, unrest, and exploitation, has crowded the narratives of all African writers. And their spontaneous effort to fight injustice and fix their fragmented and adulterated identity had ceaselessly given birth to literature. Now, coming to the point that African literature or literature in general allows the world today empathize the irrevocable losses that the continent and its inhabitants had undergone. And the African initiative to pen down their experiences enabled them to journey from having merely a perishable existence towards having an expectation to reach old age. The writers, time and again, we find that they focus on one fact, that an African's life is spent in struggling to prove that race as a category never existed, and that they are in no way different from the rest of the world. In trying to show that they are equal by attempting to suppress aggression at the face of racial discomfort and by struggling to believe that they are just another human face trying to realize that love is the only way to make life forget that it is temporary, they already always complicate their identities. Race never happens to be an issue as long as an African is in Africa. The non-American African becomes a black once they enter America. Their lives become wrapped up in despair and meaninglessness with their permanent effort to look liberal, to pose to be less sensitive, and to be least tormented at the sight of racial criticisms, or by any comment that suffocates their sense of self and chokes the essential self-esteem of a human being. An African actually has no country. There remains absolutely no difference between a Nigerian or a Kenyan or even a Jamaican. An African is itself a category, a mass which has no visible differences but only bodies that preserve marks of oppression and violence. Now, coming to my next point is of the 54 sovereign African countries, none of its inhabitants are identified by their national identities worldwide. Instead, they are an indistinguishable whole referred to as Africans. Of all the 7 continents in the world, it is only Africa whose inhabitants are forced to live a volatile existence. If the case is so, then the nationless, identityless literature could be termed as human literature instead of African literature, as the latter term supports racial distinctions instead of reflecting on the innovations of the raceless human heart. Only African literature is categorized by the continent from where its creators come. No other writer of the world except Africans work under the banner of the continent he or she belongs to. His or her name is instead prefixed by a national identity. For example, when we talk about the Indian writers or Chinese or Japanese writers, we never say Asian writers. We tell them by their nationality, which is why readers are able to make discrete analysis about the nationwide difference in culture, tradition, and the policies on one hand, and receive the noticeable characteristics of the continent as a whole on the other. Therefore, by terming literature created as Ghanaian or Nigerian or a Kenyan writer as African literature, it not only intensifies their crisis of identity, but also notions readers that the country-wise cultural distinctions are not worthy enough to be noticed. Such a continent-wise categorization hints at the fact that the term African is a meaningless designation that accommodates a doomed race. An African has at once a national, continental, and a transnational identity. Perhaps having multiple identities forces an individual to continuously wrestle to either help the identities to stop to dash against one another or to save at least one identity because his or her entire existence is in itself slippery. An African, in order to get out of his cramped existence, begins to live unfamiliar lives with the hope of coming to terms with his or her sense of rootlessness. Now, an African writer's divided self is the curse of devastation and immigration. When the Africans began to compromise with their sense of self and with their inherent set of ideologies and values in order to make peace with the emerging bestial mentality introduced by colonization, they had made room for the beasts to improve their strategic ways of further marginalizing the Africans to the extent of forcing them give up their name and home. This process of oppression continues still today when African diasporic individuals are unable to protest the racial barriers shrewdly raised by the white conservatives. Now, this ongoing discussion, in order to contextualize this ongoing discussion, I'll just move to 5 authors. First is Grace Ogot. Now, she is a Kenyan author, and she was born in a Christian family. She was a renowned public figure. She's worked as a nurse in London. She had worked in the university, in one of the universities in Uganda. She had been the BBC Overseas Service as a scriptwriter. She had also operated a prominent radio program in the Luo language, and she had helped found the Writers Association of Kenya, and various other works has been put up by her. The particular text that I point out views a particular resemblance to the reality she was posed into, the awkward reality she was fighting against. That is, the novel is named The Promised Land. It was published in 1966, where she focuses on the concept of ideal wife, one who is obedient and submissive to her husband, family, and is community-oriented and is committed to non-materialist goals. The story also gains power and relevance from the style, which is distinctively ironic. Agot is continuously pointing at the difficulty of migration, at the difficulty of marriage, otherness, and tribalism. She is saying that the protagonist, young farmer, and his wife. She's introducing these 2 characters and is taking readers through the journey of homecoming, where an African wife, through her sacrifices, supports the family and society, making home an abode of peace and comfort and connection. The story reflects the reality that Ogot experienced as a responsible wife and citizen. Now, the irony of the entire situation lies in the fact that women, despite being neglected or being the neglected minority, and in spite of being considered to be not equal to human beings, is a treasure hoard of possibilities without whom the entire system of improvement and benefit might cease to operate. Connected to this reality is also the life of Ben Okri, who was devastated by the Nigerian Civil War. His writings, time and again, convey the political and social chaos in Nigeria, the corruption and lunacy of a politically scared country. In the novels named as Flowers and Shadows, which was published in 1980, and The Landscape Within, 1981. He is writing in order to, he is describing the inner workings of the mind of the artist protagonist. He is focusing on the sense of incompleteness, on the idea of unachieved. He is also focusing on the fact that the Nigerian Civil War had introduced lifelong darkness into the life of the youths, forcing them to suffer namelessness forever. The most important figure who has battled against war and immigration to the farthest extreme is Aminata Forna. In her memoir, which is named The Devil That Danced on Water, published in the year 2003. This is an intensely personal history. It provides a passionate and brave account of her family's experiences living in the war-torn Sierra Leone, and in particular, her father's tragic fate as a political dissident. This memoir records an African childhood, an ideal that became the stuff of nightmare. The book also registers the post-colonial turmoil, danger, flight, the bitterness of exile in Britain. And finally, the memoir ends with the fact that Aminata was able to disclose the conspiracy surrounding her father's imprisonment and force the nation's politicians to confront their guilt. The next is Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. She was a Nigerian writer, and her family was completely lost during the Nigerian Civil War. Her novels, which I'll be pointing out, one is Americana and certain parts of half of the Yellow Sun, not much. Her novels document the fact that race as an idea became something that she had to navigate and learn. Her life, like the other diasporans, is divided between the United States and Nigeria. Now, Americana, the novel, which was published in 2013, is an insightful portrayal of Nigerian immigrant life and race relations in America and the Western world. The more metaphorical theme that spans the novel is the idea of separation versus connection. This involves personal misunderstandings, physical distances, and cultural and racial divides. She points out two characters, two Nigerians who immigrate, one to America and the other to England. Both of them try various ways to acculturate with their new settlement. One of them, her name is Ifemelu. She realizes that identity plays an important role because she is growing up. Her life situations are in a way asking her to realize that her identity as a person is inextricably linked to her racial and national identity. She struggles with her identity as an African American. She quickly acculturates with the American accent. She straightens her hair. She dates a white man. However, in the later part of the novel, we find that she's gradually regaining her confidence and she's embracing her Nigerianness, although she has adapted her American culture. The fact is, when she's returning to Nigeria, she feels a sense of in-betweenness. She feels half American and half Nigerian, and from where comes the title of the novel, that is Americana. The other character, which is Obbins, what happens to him when he returns from England, he faces same kind of difficulty in adjusting with the identities which has been formed in England and the identities back in Nigeria. The novel ends with a hope that these two friends, Ifemelu and Obbins, when they return to Nigeria, they talk about their identities, the newly formed identities, and they reconcile with the identities which they had before the separation began. Adichie also, in her novel Half of a Yellow Sun, which was published in 2006, it was also the story of the Nigerian Civil War, and here she points, she's pointing at the fact that the story is being narrated from the point of view of the Igbo characters who are all affected by the massacres and the war and holds a desperate hope in the future of Nigeria. England started all the trouble by colonizing and oppressing Nigeria, stirring up ethnic tensions and supplying arms to Nigeria during the war. Nigeria used starvation and genocide as weapons of war. Adichie creates a tone of constant suspense as the country becomes a place of danger and casual violence. The last author is Teju Kole. He is a Nigerian American writer, and in his novel Open Cities, he is speaking about a Nigerian immigrant, and the novel is entirely set in the New York City. This particular man, the immigrant, the Nigerian immigrant Julius, he is isolated. He becomes a mixed race and is estranged from his family. He is trying to overcome a breakup with his girlfriend. He is trying to work on his professional relationships. Being a second-generation Nigerian American, he's passionate about his African roots, and therefore he's visiting the African burial ground. Now he's trying to cope up, acculturate with this detached existence, and therefore he attempts to reconnect with his matriarchal grandmother, which also fails. The novel shows Julius openly walking through the city, and while he's walking and whatever he's doing, he is not present in anything. He is preoccupied with his own thoughts, and this concept of openness is invoked by the title, and it suitably describes Julius, who is open to experiences because he's detached from the American dream surrounding him. He sees the city from his own perspective, making value judgments from his biracial and bi-ethnic background. Thus, the title suggests that the city is a platform for experience, and it is an open mechanism that one can participate with in many ways. So all the texts that I have mentioned and all the discussion that I wanted to make has one thing in common, that many forces work upon the creation of someone's identity, cultural, racial, and economic ones, as well as a person's will and preference also matters in the process of identity formation. The novel and the reality they accommodate show that sometimes the only redemption seems to be trying to avoid history's mistakes by fully confronting them. So I get back to the title of my paper. Every African writer, therefore, has an unattended past identity and another acquired identity framed by sacrifices and soaked in sympathy, which shall forever be questioned. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tiruna Sadhu, for your wonderful paper on the two identities, I mean, the divided identities or two identities of every person, every African writer, that is the role played by war and immigration in creating such a reality. You have chosen a number of novels to elucidate your point. I would now like to open your paper for discussion. Any comments, any observations, any questions for Dr. Sadhu? Any comments, any observations, any questions for Dr. Sadhu, please? It has been a very comprehensive and a very interesting paper, trying to focus on the different identities. Perhaps the point that she first made, that calling somebody African is meaningless, because there is the race. I mean, there are the different countries which have not been singled out. Yes, please. Yes, any questions? Any questions, any observations or comments? So we should we then go on to the next speaker? Sarah Grace John. Is Sarah Grace John there in the
Yes, sir.
Class? Okay. Sarah Grace John is MA English and Communication Studies, Christ, deemed to be University of Bangalore, Karnataka, and she's speaking on race and diaspora in the works of Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. Yes, please.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you. May I please switch off my video because it takes up a lot of bandwidth.
Okay, please do so, and please start on your presentation.
Yes, thank you. Good evening, respected chair and co-presenters. I'm Sarah Grace John, and I'll be
Hello.
Sir, I think she's having the network problem again.
She's left, it seems.
Yes,
she's having
yes.
a network problem. We must wait for her. She just started on her paper. Oh, she's joined. She's joined.
Hello.
Hello,
yes.
Sarah.
I'm extremely sorry for the technical glitch.
Okay, okay. Please continue.
Okay. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie is one of the pioneering Nigerian writers belonging to the third generation women writers of Africa, and she is highly acclaimed for her realistic representations of the multifaceted African experience. Her works, which include 3 novels and a short story collection, have been accredited with numerous awards and honors. Race, identity crisis, diaspora, cultural assimilation, and gender are themes that recur in all her works with rejuvenated frequency and fervor. Adichie is adept at striking the right balance between asserting African standards of culture and deconstructing Western stereotypes regarding the same. She uses both the setting of the story and her characters to achieve this. The differences that are apparent in a diasporic landscape resonate with the disillusionment in the minds of the migrants. as in her award-winning novel Americana, and most of the short stories in the collection, The Thing Around Your Neck. Furthermore, the crisis that stems from the African-American diaspora is accompanied by what Adichie calls the danger of a single-sided story. That is, the West's standardized notions about Africa, which she chooses to debunk through her character's experience. Racial diaspora does not involve a single-sided story. It is historically entrenched and is reiterated with every diasporic experience which involves an oppressor and the oppressed. Acknowledging the transgressions of a privileged white American on racial grounds is as important as addressing an African's tumultuous cultural shock. For instance, in America's public discourse, blacks as a whole are often lumped with poor whites. Not poor blacks and poor whites, but blacks and poor whites. It is this type of blatant stigmatization that Adichie combats through her works. Through the analogy of a foreign journalist who has preconceived answers about Africa to his own questions, Adichie calls for an approach similar to the tabula rasa or a blank slate in approaching Afro-diasporian culture and literature.
Yes, Sarah, where are you? Is there again a network problem? Hello? Sarah, where are you? Sarah, where are you? Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
But where is Sarah? Sarah, please come back. Where are you? Hello?
Sarah Grace John, are you there?
Sarah, again a network problem, is it?
I think so, sir.
She's just, she was going through a paper. Oh, she's joined. Sarah?
Hello, sorry sir, there's heavy rain this morning, so the connection is very hazy here.
I understand. You start from where you stopped. I mean that part, from
Yes,
where you left it.
yes, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you. Adichie says, I quote, "What if I say it's just possible to put everything you know about Africa in a backpack and then leave that backpack behind when you go? That's the way to go. It is to have an open mind," unquote. Through the identity crisis that her protagonists go through in diverse scenarios and extremes of marginalization, Adichie evokes a constant ache for self-definition within fragmented identities. These fictional representations of Africans caught between their cultural roots and the American dream are depicted to be in a continuous race to find an identity and live according to it. In most of her works, the crisis eventually leads to a deconstruction of the foreign ideas and dichotomy that it entails, along with the simultaneous reconstruction of a Nigerian homeland. The development of a Nigerian identity is a confluence of historical, social, and political factors. As described by Daly, the models of time and space are not valid anymore, since transnational migration and displacement are fundamental aspects that define the Nigerian nation, which can be seen as, I quote, "an entity made through movement," unquote. Adichie explores the concept of nationhood as an identity marker through the complex struggles of her characters. Unlike her predecessors, such as Chinua Achebe, who used nationality as a tool to celebrate and establish the nation, Adichie challenges the meaning of nation as a single coherent story. She says, I quote, "Achebe's characters were nothing like me and lived without the things that I saw as the norm in my life: cars, electricity, and telephones," unquote. The diasporic experience, population dispersion, and migration trigger a rethinking of the idea of belonging, especially concerning nationhood and nationality. Adichie looks at the same problem from multiple stances and substantiates it from multiple standpoints. Her works, Purple Hibiscus and Half of a Yellow Sun, put forth contradictory outlooks on the merging of culture and traditional value system. While blending and intermingling of cultural differences are seen as a viable option in a post-colonial scenario in the former, A mixed identity is deemed unattainable in the latter owing to historical reasons. Adichie says, I quote, I think that America, because of its history, is one country where in some ways identity is forced on you because you have to check a box. You have to be something. America will label you black anyway. So the things that black people experience, I experience. Unquote. Reformulation of national identity, of belonging to Nigeria, is shown through characters who find themselves stuck at the crossroads with the idealization of the American dream and diaspora, contrary to the expectation of the migrants. Ambiguous reminiscence of home and homeland in Nigeria function as fragmented yet constructed nostalgia or distant reality. During an interview with Maria Blackburn, Adichie confessed her own sentiments on belonging. I quote, I will always feel like I do not belong in the United States of America fully, even though I also feel I am an observer in Nigeria. Unquote. The migrants in her diasporic setup feel alienated from the white community and American culture while being unable to disconnect themselves from their African origins fully. They are somehow displaced from the latter and subordinated by the former. Another central premise of racism that she contends through her works is the reductive portrayal of the African continent, which consequently denies an African the right to be considered as equally human. According to Adichie, I quote, we are all of the human race, but there are differences, and those differences affect our experiences, our opportunities. Unquote. In her article, Authenticity and the Biafran Experience, she recalls an anecdote of how a professor at an American university found it difficult to accept the fact that Adichie, an African student, wrote the best essay in the class. Americana, a novel that has subtle undertones of her own life experiences, involves numerous incidents where people of color were exoticized and dehumanized. For instance, the protagonist Ifemelu did not think of herself as black. She only became black when she went to America. It is then that she realizes that race is an all-pervasive part of life. Adichie backs this crude reality with numerous anecdotes, such as those of Obinze and Auntie Uju. Obinze was mocked for scraping his knee because he is a Negro. People assumed that the white Kurt could not be dating Ifemelu, who was black. Patients refused to have Auntie Uju as their doctor on the basis of her color. As analyzed by Stuart Hall, the Western regimes of representation based on power differences not only construct people of color's experience as others, but they also have the power to make them experience themselves as such. The othering and multi-layered nature of racism and colorism inherent in the American community are elucidated through the blog posts of the protagonist in Americana. One of the posts contains a humorous, sarcastic passage which takes a dig at the hierarchy that penetrates the base superstructure relationship in America. I quote, there is a ladder of racial hierarchy in America. White is always on top, specifically white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, otherwise known as WASP, and American black is always on the bottom. And what is in the middle depends on time and place. Or as that marvelous rhyme goes, if you are white, you are all right. If you are brown, stick around. And if you are black, get back. This validates the fact that the racially biased lives that migrants live are often contrary to the utopian American dreams. The story, The Thing Around Your Neck, in which Acuna, the protagonist, painstakingly realizes that America is way different from her expectations, is a stark example. So is the story of Kamara and Tobechi on Monday of last week. I quote, you thought everybody in America had a car and a gun. Your uncles and aunts and cousins thought so too. Right after you won the American visa lottery, they told you, in a month, you will have a big car, soon a big house. But don't buy a gun like those Americans, I unquote. As from on Monday of last week, I quote, America was about hard work, they both knew, and one would make it if one was prepared to work hard. Tobechi would get to America and find a job and work for 2 years and get a green card and send for her. But 2 years passed, then 4, and Tobechi could not send money as much as he wanted because of it was because most of it was going into what he called sorting his papers. Her auntie's whisperings became louder and louder. What's that boy waiting for? Unquote. Apart from fictional representations, Adichie's own experiences in America, where she replaced her Igbo name, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, with the westernized name Amanda N. Adichie when she started writing, is an example of the impact of race as an all-encompassing threat. In this context especially, it can either curb or create professional opportunities and consequent economic progress. In a pattern similar to hers, Adichie's characters often rename themselves as a strategy to assimilate into a culture that is alien to them. The character Offerdale Udenwa from Adichie's short story, The Arrangers of Marriage, published in The Thing Around Your Neck, changes his name to Dave Bell because, I quote, Americans have a hard time with Udenwa, unquote. And he also forces his wife, Chinaza Okafor, to change her name to Agatha Bell. Dave insists on the importance of being assimilated into the American culture, although it is done at the cost of his African origins, and tells her, I quote, you don't understand how it works in this country. If you want to get anywhere, you have to be as mainstream as possible, unquote. A strong interconnection between personal and political is one of the significant characteristics of Adichie's works. In the coming-of-age story, Purple Hibiscus, she explores the tension.
Sir, I am absolutely sorry to interrupt you, but please try to wrap up because we have 2 more speakers left. Sir? Sir, are you there?
Sir, are you there?
No,
sir.
Sir,
Are you there?
Sir, Dr. Mary Jane Okoli has joined us.
Yes, I know that. But is Sarah there? Sarah?
Yes, Sarah joined again.
Yes. Sarah, please continue and wind up, please.
Yes, I'm at the last paragraph, sir.
Okay. Please continue.
Yes, thank you. In her most famous work, Americana, the struggles she faces as a result of her African-American identity are placed against the backdrop of embracing Nigerian values. Ifemelu, who tries to adopt a fake accent, straightens her hair, and uses a false identity to look for success, is later shown to be giving up her accent, growing her hair naturally, and dating a white guy. Although there is a reverse transition to the African identity, on a closer look, it is evident that it is an African-American diasporic identity that has emerged. Cultural appropriations such as these are often overlooked as a media of Americanization or the homogenization of culturally diverse communities under the superstructure that America is. Every instance of racial disparity or diasporic stigma that each of Adichie's characters go through is a bold reiteration of the idea of America as a melting pot, as proposed by John Dewey. While supremacy and or subordination doesn't have room for multiculturalism, it demands assimilation of differences and identities as a requisite for inclusion. Through the use of realism, Adichie vocalizes the dire circumstances that dehumanize the African identity and put its rich cultural heritage at stake. The jeopardy that her characters are subjected to at the hands of the oppressors, sometimes due to double marginalization on grounds of race and gender, is portrayed poignantly with ample use of sarcasm and cynicism. While some of them come to terms with the institutionalized hegemony of race, the lion's share of Adichie's protagonists achieve the agency that they strive for and rekindle a new identity for themselves. That's all. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Sarah, for your wonderful paper on the diasporic experiences of African migrants, alienated as they were in a dominant American white culture. What was so very interesting is that how they face marginalization because of race, but you have also included the point gender. Could you please explain in one line what exactly do you mean by marginalization due to gender? Hello? Sarah, can you hear me? Sarah, can you hear me? Sarah, can you hear me? Am I audible? Am I audible,
Yes,
Sarah?
you are audible, sir.
But probably Sarah cannot hear me.
So,
In that
Sarah
case,
joined again. I think she will answer your question.
yes, Sarah, could you please, Sarah, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
You talked about marginalization on the grounds of race, but why gender? Why is it that you have also used the word gender in your abstract? Could you please explain?
Yes, sir. The main reason is because there is a particular when it comes to marginalization in the African American course. It's always the white American man, the white American woman, the black man, and the black woman. So if you are black, you come way below in the hierarchy compared to other women.
Okay, okay. So
you are marginalized on the basis of your race as well as your gender.
Oh, I see. Any other question? Yes, it is. Any other question for Sarah, Grace, John? Any questions? Any observations, comments? Then we would move on to the next speaker. Thank you, Sarah, so much. We move on to the next speaker.
Thank you so much.
That is SR Dr. Mary J.N. Okoli. SR Dr. Mary J.N. Okoli. She hails from the Department of English and Literary Studies, University of Nigeria, Nsukka. Dr. Okoli, are you there? Can you hear me? Am I audible to you? Dr. Okoli, are you there? Can you hear me? Am I audible to you? Dr. Okoli, are you there? Can you hear me? Chandra, am I audible?
Yes, you.
Yes, Dr.
Yes. Can you hear me too?
Yes, I can. So please do make your presentation.
Beautiful. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Mary J.N. Okoli from the Department of English and Literary Studies, University of Nigeria. My paper is titled Seen from the Border, African Literature and Border Studies. This paper actually, what it does is to suggest or propose another dimension of theoretically or analytical study of African literature. And that dimension or the perspective is border poetics. Border poetics is very recent. It's a very recent area of study. It's actually my focus in my PhD, which I had last year. Precisely, border studies is domiciled in the geography and political science department or discipline. But recently, since the 1980s, there's been a shift of the reimagining of border from the geography department, from considering border as physical walls that separate nations and states. This idea of reconsideration of border from the notion of the touchable, the tangible, to the idea of border as very much symbolic, epistemologic, and textual, brings the border studies into the domain of literature. And what I have done in this paper is to, first of all, foreground what I mean by border poetics, look at a few persons, a few scholars that has been doing these studies in literature, and finally do a pragmatic or a practical application of border poetics in Nadine Godima's the July paper. I'll just read some aspects of the paper because of lack of time. So using theories of the border as framework for literary analysis allows the application of the ideas related to the ambivalence of the border and border crosser, since border poetics, as Johann Szymanski holds, not only deal with passages, but also with hindered passages, with successful and unsuccessful border crossings. What I am doing, a little explanation, what I'm doing is to transpose the ideas, the paradigms of the border, where in the ordinary sense of the border, when I say the border, I mean like in the geography department or discipline, we have the border as something like a national border where you have a crossing from maybe Nigeria to Ghana. But in the literary text, there are instances of crossing. And these instances of crossing, according to one of the theorists, Johan Szymanski, he's a Norwegian scholar, and he has been working so much on border poetics. According to him, there are 5 planes of analysis of the border in the literary text. And these 5 planes are the epistemological, where you find when you look at the literary text as a landscape of movement of characters, movement of interactions, you find there is a movement from the known, or rather from the unknown to the known. A typical example is with the Americana. Some of us have read Americana, and the last speaker made a mention of something like, she doesn't know that she is Black until she got to the space of the white in America. So that movement from the unknown to the known is what border poetics addresses as epistemological border crossing. Then you have textual border crossing, whereby border poetics takes or accounts for the movements between sentences, paragraphs, sections in the text, so that these sections, these paragraphs, their linkages, it's not just overlooked. They are not just overlooked, but they are taken into consideration as they account for what informs 2 things. One, the relationship between the linguistic elements in the text, and secondly, the relationship between this text and the social space it addresses, or the social issue it addresses. There are very few literary critics that have, because it is new, there are very few literary critics that have engaged literary text from the border perspective. A typical example is Chindi Madago in his study of The River Between, Ngugi wa Thiong'o's The River Between. He looks at religion. Ordinarily, when we study or when we thematize religion or any of these social factors that cause divide between people, we look at them, maybe feminism, we look at gender as just gender within the theoretical framework of feminism. We look at class as status divide within the theoretical framework of Marxism. But what border poetics does is to envelope all these instances of divide and account for them. So somehow we call it an umbrella theory that accounts for not just the single strands of this binary oppositions, but taking a holistic look at all of them and accounting for the movement that happens within the text. Now I move on to using the July paper. July's paper is Nadine Gordimer's, one of Nadine Gordimer's novels, South African. And what July paper, the summary of this story is, it's set in the era of Black revolution in South Africa after the apartheid, or at the tail end of the apartheid period, where the Blacks revolted and are now going against the whites that have been oppressing them. So July is the main character in this text, and July for the past 15 years was the seventh of a family, a white family, the Bam Smalls and his wife, Maureen. So during this revolution, he has to, take this man and his wife and the 3 children on refuge. He took them to an African settlement where he hid them. So now, border poetics does not only, it also looks at this movement, the physical movement, but it does something beyond looking at the physical movement from Johannesburg to the the settlement. What it does is to look at other complex forms of movement. A typical example, the one I have here, is the movement that happens within the life of the Smalls family, where they leave the power space they enjoyed in Johannesburg and become the guests of their servant. And so in that sense, we have a transposition of power, because within the space of the settlement, July now becomes the master. And being the master enables him to take care of these ones. And so the text opens with, because in the other section of the work, I looked at what language does as a troop of border. So the one I will kind of present to us here is the very opening sentence of that text, where it said, July bent at the doorway and began that day for them. Them is Bam and Morin, his former masters, or his masters. So he bent at the doorway and began that day for them, as his kind has always done for their kind. Border poetics begs us to stop at this moment and look at what is happening there, what language is doing in that space of narration. His kind and their kind. So we find a kind of a border, a divide between two kinds, the kind of July and the kind of the small family. And from so many instances of the theory of border, you can just take this line, we take this line of this sentence and expand it into a narration, an analysis that presents a kind of movement, a kind of, using technical term, a kind of territorialization, the territories where that these two class of people live in. So the above statement does not only present the action of service. Remember, he bent to give them tea. So it does not only present the action of service. At the deeper level, and considering the scene in the light of bordering, one sees a here, there, us, you, slave master, black, white binaries. This dichotomy conditions the relationship between July and his guests at the initial stage of their escape. Hence, while no physical wall is built between them, the consciousness created by social structures remains in place despite the change in the physical space. So that despite the change from Johannesburg to the unnamed African settlement, there is also a movement of this power at the initial state point of the narrative. But towards the end of the narrative, we find what I've said earlier, this transposition of power, because over time, the Smalls family became so dependent on July. So according to David Newman, he is a known border theorist. According to David Newman, the here, there, and us, them cutoff points are not always played out through the construction of physical and visible walls and fences. They may be as invisible as they are tangible, and equally as perceived as they are real. He goes on, I define you as belonging to a different social, ethnic, economic, or religious group, and as such, I have created a border between the self from the other. So I get to the conclusion because of time. So I said, considering Godima's July paper from the perspective of border poetics, exposes the complexity of the African history, apartheid in quotes here, because the text is addressing the apartheid period. So it exposes the complexity of African history etched in the bodies and landscapes of the text. Border poetics is a response to border critics' call to acquire and actively promote an understanding of the processes through which all types of borders can be opened even further and how they can be crossed with greater ease. So arguably, border poetics helps us to account for the movements in the text and their connection to the social world that the text addresses. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Mary Okoli, for your wonderful paper on the complexities of border poetics with the movements that it envisions, especially with reference to the novel that you have referred to in your analysis or elucidation of this problem. I throw this paper open to discussion. Does anyone have any question, any observation to make on Mary Okoli's paper, please? Any observation, any comments on Dr. Mary Okoli's paper? I do understand that we are reaching the last part of this session, but still, any observations, any comments? It has been a very interesting paper of a very new kind of a study, which Dr. Okoli has rightly pointed out that border studies is pretty new to us. Any comments, please? So in that case, we move on to the last speaker of this session, that is Saannay Basu Majumdar. Saannay, am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Achha. We move on to your paper, that is Saannay Basu Majumdar is a student of MA English Language and Literature of Rishi Bankim Chandra College, and he is speaking on amalgamation of reality and imagination in Ben Okri's Worlds That Flourish. This paper is the last paper of this session. Please start, Saannay, and make your presentation.
Sir, I think the PowerPoint presentation is visible.
Yes, it is.
So this is the paper, Amalgamation of Reality and Imagination in Ben Okri's Short Story Worlds That Flourish. So right now the time is very short, so I'm not read out the whole paper. So I'm skipping the introduction and I'm directly moving into the concept of reality and imagination. The first segment of reality, that is named the Thrust of Reality. The story opens with the bitter reality as the unnamed narrator states in the first paragraph of the story that he has been sacked from his job. But immediately he also tells that his relation with the department is not much longer, and that is the reason he leaves the workplace without bitterness. This section tells the reader the socio-economical condition of the urban man in late 20th century. A robbery occurs at his house on that day, which is quite an astonishing incident, and most surprisingly, the robbers rob him without any violence. As the author mentions, they were not nasty or brutal. Or he writes, as I'm quoting, while they chatted, they bundled my things into a heap and carried them out to their lorry as they were merely helping me to move. The sarcastic tone of the writer about critiquing the contemporary Nigerian government or the governments of other African countries and their fallacy get revealed as the robbers criticize the government while they discuss with the unnamed narrator. The sarcasm reaches to its highest point as one of the robbers say, "This is what we call scientific robbery." The more powerful shock comes next as 5 soldiers visit the narrator's house with arms and arrest him by just believing the words of the robbers, as they have mentioned the narrator as their accomplice to save their necks. Then the narrator tells how the police administration treats him along with the robbers and they get freed by paying their dues. This is how the author shows the nature of a corrupted system in a capitalist world and the brutality of the state towards the convicts and the victims also. Then the narrator tells how the city starts to change and the change creates an impact upon the lifestyle of the people, the regular picture of the streets and even the behavior of the animals. The narrator tells more about his search for jobs, but equally states how the workers are being sacked in great numbers everywhere. He states that there are no strikes anywhere. Readers find the most surprising and contradictory situation when the narrator states about the words of the head of the state. Here I quote, "Sometimes I listened to the head of the state's broadcasts on the radio. He spoke about austerity, about tightening the national belt and a great future. He sounded very lonely, as though he were talking in a vast and empty room." Perhaps this is the post-colonial crisis which most of the third world countries have seen. African countries have faced no exceptions in a similar way. Even today in 2020, India is also experiencing same kind of scenario which is prevalent from last few years. There is another conversation in the story which also tells about the socio-political, cultural status of the country. Here I quote, "What is happening to the country?" I asked her. "Nothing is happening." Okri depicts the truth as we find in his writing that he describes the situation as it happens in real after a natural disaster. Trees had fallen, houses had crumbled before the force of the wind and rain, dead cats floated in the gutters, there were no birds in the air. The reality check of the story must be done with the help of an eco-critical perspective, as the readers can easily find out how the narrator describes the nature from the point he leaves the city, which shows the writer's concern for the nature. The writer never fails to mention the trees, forest, hills, rocks, river, mountains, and even the animals, birds, and even insects. The narrator says about minute details like mountain ranges, plateaus of ambergris rocks, and even clay-colored anthill. Most probably it is Ben Okri who expresses his love and concern for nature through these elements of his works. The next segment of the paper is the imagination, various layers and absurdity. In the process of analysis of this text, it must be remembered that Ben Okri is a successful poet also. In his process of imagination, there is a huge influence of poetry. In the 13th chapter of Biographia Literaria, Coleridge has written about his thought on fancy and imagination, which has become a cult. He has propagated his theory of primary imagination, which is merely the power of receiving impression of the external world through senses, and secondary imagination, which is a power that dissolves, diffuses, dissipates in order to recreate. So it can be said that it is the conscious will of Ben Okri as he uses his secondary imagination to recreate another parallel world in this story. As soon as the author leaves the city and enters the forest, the readers delve into an altered reality deeply without knowing what lies beneath. The readers start to realize it only when the narrator encounters a new experience, and that is the artistic mastery of Ben Okri. Absurdity is the core essence of Okri's imagination in this story. The second sentence of the story introduces the sense of absurdity when the narrator cannot tell his name to a man, quote unquote, for some reason. And it immediately strikes the mind of the readers that this man can be anyone who does not want to reveal his name. But later it becomes absolutely clear that this man is not a regular person. Rather, he is a fictional representation of a self of the author. The existence of the neighbor can be interpreted as an alter ego of the unnamed narrator who knows things the narrator does not know. The neighbor is the man who reminds the narrator that he is unable to observe the changing world around himself, and he does not notice anything as he does not have eyes. Even when the soldiers arrive at the narrator's house, the neighbor's words create an absolute absurdity. Here I quote, "I told you that you don't have eyes." Then he went to one of the soldiers and, to my astonishment, he said, "Mr. Soldier, I hope you treat him as he deserves. I always thought something was wrong with his head." This neighbor is the man who points out that the narrator is absolutely unaware of what is happening around him, and the narrator also gets the proof later. He starts to realize about the decaying society which is dying each day. The narrator starts to fill a lacune afterwards, which he refers as empty space repeatedly. The narrator fails to get in touch with his friends and realizes the people are leaving the city, and the empty space in his mind turns out to be real with time. The situation turns into more absurd when he starts to notice peculiar handwritings on people's faces and hands, which he has never noticed before. After lingering through dark times of natural disaster, he finds his escape from the mundane world and set out on a journey without any destination. He gets lost in the forest and becomes a lost creature, but he becomes able to find some peace in this situation. Soon he finds out an oil station, and the man in charge of that place tries to stop him from going to a path which was a kind of forbidden path, and advises him to stay where he can be happy. But the narrator deliberately goes to that particular path as if it was the path of happiness for him. Thus the mystery set in with the elements of further imagination of the writer, which gets blended with the reality. After a series of mysterious events with supernatural intervention in the forest, the narrator reaches to a village which seems like a magic world to him. He starts to find out palm trees growing upside down. He gets to meet people who say again and again that they are waiting for him. He feels quite uncomfortable, and it takes time for him to recover his health and senses, but he becomes fit after receiving enough food, shelter, and rest. After the recovery, the narrator finds out the peculiarity and the strangeness of the place and its people. Here I quote, "Some of the people of the village had their feet facing backwards. I was amazed that they could walk. Some people came out of the tree trunks. Some had wings, but they could not fly." Then the narrator starts to face eerie experiences one by one, which is the craftsmanship of imagination. The climax arrives when he finds out his lost neighbor there, who tells him that he is here because he was shot by a soldier, and then comes the ultimate question of existence in their conversation. As I quote, "They will tell you at the meeting." What is the meeting about? Life and death. What life? What death? This existential crisis strikes the narrator hard, and he finds out that moving forward is making him to move backward, and here lies the masterstroke of absurdity in the segment of imagination in the story. Then the narrator realizes that running backwards is actually taking him forward. Gradually, he becomes able to identify his dead wife there and realizes that it was the land of dead, and continues to move in the backward motion what takes him forward, and he moves out of that area. Later, he finds out his own dead body in his car, and reality hits him hard. Another strange incident happens, and the story ends with a sense of hope. Here I conclude. The journey and the struggle of the unnamed narrator certainly remind of Sisyphus' struggle and the Albert Camus, the myth of Sisyphus, but here the narrator does not commit suicide but continues his journey even after death. Certainly, it is evident from the story that Bain Okri is a literary artist with the power of negative capability, as he is capable of being in uncertainties, mysteries, doubts, without any irritable reaching after the fact and reason. But still, he is a postmodern writer. It is the skill of such a legendary author that reality and imagination exists in the heart of the story, worlds that flourish, as two sides of a single coin. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
So now am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Shona, it has been a wonderful paper that you have presented. I was really thinking that what kind of realism is actually envisaged in this story? Is it something like magic realism, or is it something that goes into metaphysical levels? Would you just comment on the realism or the reality factor? I mean, he seems to be moving away from corporeal reality.
So actually, there are a lot of references which matches with magic realism, but the absurd nature, it does not match with the magic. And in magic realism, the reality gradually turns into the imaginary world, but here two things goes parallelly. So the reality the author present is the harsh truth and the harsh reality, but the imagination and the supernatural things and the absurdity is just different layers on that reality actually.
Okay, I open this paper for discussion. Anybody having any comments, any observations to make, any questions for Saannay?
I just want to say that I really like the paper very much, and I would like to read the author's work.
Okay, ma'am. It is Bain O'Cree's short story collection, Stars of the New Curfew. The name of the collection. And
Is he a French writer?
No. He is an author with Nigerian background, but later he shifted to London.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, any other comments or observations, please? In that case, we should think of bringing this session to a close. Our two speakers, Dr. Nagaratna V. Parande and Dr. Syed Mujahid, have they come? Saannay, have they come?
No, sir.
They haven't. So in that case, let us call it a day. I would like to end this session by thanking all the speakers and all the participants. The speakers have presented excellent papers. They were very thought-provoking. They were very interesting and original. And the participants as well, they made this session a success. With these words, I would like to close this session today. Tomorrow we have the next second day of the webinar, and we meet at 1 o'clock by Indian Standard Time. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so
So nice to be here.
Sir, you're patient and nice chairperson. And I really
Thank you.
absolutely nice time with the presentations.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you everyone for joining. We will expect you tomorrow also. There are wonderful speakers tomorrow. So I think we end here today. This is the end of this session.
Okay. Thank you, Saannay, once again for your kind help.
Thank you so much, sir.
Bye then.
Bye, sir.